There was the occasional one. I think one of the boys, I'm not quite sure on this, one of the boys got burnt to death in his tent because everybody was drunk and threw a smoke grenade into the tent and set fire. These tents would go up in about 17 seconds. You know, they're very volatile pieces of equipment. And he was too drunk to get out of bed, and he was barbecued. That was a bit of a disaster for one of the boys. People don't get up and do things to be brave. People get up and do things because they've got to be done. That's just the way it is. And you don't go out of your way to commit brave acts. Circumstances are there, and you have to live with the circumstances, and that's what creates these acts of valour. It does work. You know, if you can have a damn good swear sometimes, you can get over it. And it helps to relieve the tension. Some people would say, well, that's not right. Well, there's a lot of difference between right and alive too.
And there's worse ways you can...
And there's damn sight worse ways for it to come out later on. If it doesn't manifest itself now, it comes out in much worse scenarios later. Good morning, my name's Alan Anderson. I live here in Brisbane. I was born in 1947, March to be exact, in Sydney. Due to a divorce of my parents, we moved away and we came to live here in Brisbane. From there I went to school, went to work. As I got older, I looked around and saw things that were happening in the world, and the Vietnam War had started, and I volunteered to be a national serviceman, and went to Vietnam. Came back. I stayed in the army for an extra 2 years. I went to Malaysia and Singapore. I was married. My wife and I were married between returning from Vietnam and going to Malaysia. We travelled extensively through Asia while we were there. We came back to Australia and built the house that you're now in. We moved in here Anzac Day 1972. And I've had just on 20 years in the police. I became ill about 8 years ago. They couldn't find what it was. Eventually I had a couple of nervous breakdowns, and I finished work and became a house husband 6 years ago. And I love my job.
Excellent.
Did you stop in Singapore on the way over at all?
No. Darwin, Sydney, Darwin and Saigon. And on the home flight, Saigon, Sydney, non-stop.
Was there the typical quick, steep descent into Saigon?
707s fly like buses. They don't do things very sharp. There's always turns and banks and that type of thing. But it's not like a jet where it swoops in, no. They're big aircraft, and they have to have a certain glide path to come through. And there was nothing outstanding about the landing other than the pilot saying the ground fire was light to moderate.
So getting off the plane?
It was a bloody scary experience because you didn't know whether he was joking or not. Because they'd been, you could see the bombs where there'd been explosions all around you. And, you know, at that time, when during the Vietnam War, Saigon was the busiest airport in the world. I think they had a flight every minute take off. It was pretty phenomenal, and you're too damn busy watching all the aircraft, and remember I'm an aircraft enthusiast, and there was just too much to be seen and looked at. We were then unloaded. We walked about 100 to 200 metres across the tarmac onto the back of another plane. It took off and dropped us into Nui Dat, and coming out was virtually the same thing. Straight out of Nui Dat into Saigon, 200 metres onto the back of into a plane and home. And when I went back to Vietnam in '99, I said to my wife I was going to Saigon. She said, "Why are you going to Saigon? You've been there." I said, "Yeah, I've seen 200 yards of runway this way and 200 yards of runway that way, and that's what I've seen at Saigon."
But being a young lad, first time overseas, stepping off that plane, what struck you about it?
The heat, the smell, the fear, the noise. It was an incredibly busy place with military things happening. It was like, wow, it's like, I don't know, King's Cross on New Year's Eve. It was just packed with people doing things, everybody getting on with what they had to get on with. Yeah. It was, there was just too much to sort of, and remember, this isn't a leisure cruise. this was get over there and hurry up type of stuff. And the back door of the plane closed and we took off again. It was, I don't know, probably about 20 minutes on the ground from the time you walk down the gangway, and you're gone again. So you really don't have too much time to contemplate the niceties of the Asian influence.
So the heat, the smell and the fear, how did fear play out in that?
If you said you weren't scared, you're a liar or a fool. It's as simple as that. And everybody would have had an amount of fear because you didn't know. You just didn't know where in the hell you were going, what was going to be there at the end of it. You didn't know where your weapons were. You didn't have your weapon. You didn't have a weapon with you. That's pretty scary. And that affected me later in years when I was in Malaysia without a weapon. It's so much is going through your mind at the same time, and I'm sure every man would have been the same. Every man.
So how many of you would have been in the advance party?
A plane load, which whatever a 707 could carry, that was it.
And so being in the advance party, is there a crossover with the battalion you're replacing?
Yes. Yeah, we replaced 7 RAR, and they had made a sign on a sheet. We have a Shetland pony as a mascot, and they had a pig. And it read, and I've got a colour slide of it, the pig battalion welcomes the pony soldiers. And it was a picture of a horse standing on its hind legs and a pig standing up, greeting each other. So they had that up over the gate.
Do you know why those mascots were chosen?
Wouldn't have the faintest idea. There'd be some reason back in history. Why do they call the Oscars the Oscars? It's because a fella called Oscar actually resembled the figure, and the public picked up on it, and they were literally forced to use the name Oscar because everybody knew it as an Oscar. And there'll be military tradition, of course, in the reason those particular animals. 5 Battalion has a tiger. One of the battalions has a hawk. I can't remember which it is. Each battalion had an animal mascot.
So you mentioned when you were walking that 200 metres across the tarmac in Saigon about not having your weapon with you. At what point were you given back your weapon?
When we landed in Nui Dat. Yeah, we had nothing on the flight between Saigon and Nui Dat and back again. No weapons. The weapons are at the base. That is a very uneasy feeling, to step off in a war zone without something at all. You are really putting your life in other people's hands to protect you. Yeah, it's pretty scary.
And how long was the advance party there before the rest of the battalion arrived?
It's in that book on the table. I'd have to look at the dates. I don't know. Probably about a month. And there's a gradual changeover, but the main body arrives in mass and the main body leaves in mass.
And so what are the particular responsibilities of the advance party?
Familiarisation with the area, supply lines. Bearing in mind, I was only a little soldier. I'm just sort of one of the doers. I'm one of the ants, not one of the kings. Mostly being familiar with your surroundings, basically, and so that you are aware of of what was happening at that time. So that when the main body arrived, at least you could be of some assistance to poor devils. Yeah.
So how does that familiarisation happen?
Get off the plane and start work. That's it. Nobody invites you to these things, you know. It's just you're expected to do it. You're trained and you're expected to do it. Nobody goes and holds your hand. Nobody asks you to, you know, are you feeling melancholy? You're missing mummy or something like that. It's none of those events happen. You get off the plane and you start work. That's your job. That's it. No,
So-
thank you. No, kiss my ass. No, nothing.
So what work are you doing in that initial month?
Actually, when they first rang me and asked me about this, did patrol a lot of patrol work around from the main base. That was being done all the time. The Australians were in the base. One thing that I'd like to get across to the people is that everything they've seen on television so far is Americanised. We are not Americans. We're Australians, and we have a totally different way of perceiving and performing, and our attitudes are different. They have masses of numbers and machinery. We don't. We're a small nation with a small force, and we have a totally different way of approaching things. And the perception that the average person has got is what they see on television. It was absolutely nothing like it. We were supplied by the Americans and some stuff out of Australia, but generally we took what we were supplied with and converted it to our way of life, and that's the easiest way of explaining it. But I'm trying to break this perception of what the American image showed is what we were. It wasn't. We had a different attitude and a different field of operation. We had different attitudes to things that could be done and should be done. We don't allow civilians on the base. The Americans have civilians everywhere. The Australian Army does not have civilians on a base. It's as simple as that. The base is a closed base with Australian or direct military personnel only. You never saw an Asian on the base, unless they had them in some areas that I never visited. But I can possibly say I only saw one Asian in our base, and he was in a senior uniform at the time with senior people. They just were not in the base at all. An American movies show always the civilians doing the washing and the ironing and all that stuff. No, it doesn't happen. The Australian Army is self-sufficient. They don't rely on the civilian population of any time. I hope I've made that point clear.
Alan, can you perhaps, as if you were a camera, walk me from one end of the base to the other and describe what's actually there?
No, because it's too big. I can't. This is another interesting thing that's come out in later years. You never saw outside of the immediate area you're in until you had to go somewhere, and then you saw very little of that. It wasn't like you could have a holiday and pop over and see Fred over there at 4 Battalion. That was not the way it operated. Most of the men, as I talk with them today, never saw anything of other people. You only saw the people you were with, because you had an area of responsibility, and you couldn't get up and just sort of go for a wander somewhere. It just wasn't done, because you had to be accounted for and responsible for your area and what you were doing at the time. I was very fortunate in I travelled a lot inside the Nui Dat base because of my job. But most of the men never saw a thing, and I'm sure when you talk to more of them, they'll tell you the same thing. There was never anything that they could relate to other than their immediate area. I saw most of the areas, but to sort of describe it's a bit difficult. We were inside a rubber plantation. We had the runway beside us. It was very crudely in the shape of a clove leaf, the entire base. Very crudely. There was Nui Dat Mountain. Nui Dat is Vietnamese for meaning dirt hill. The SAS were up on top of that. The Centurion tanks, the artillery were behind. The helipad was to the, I can't remember, north, south, east and west. I think it was the east of the mountain. In other words, the opposite side to us, or the hill. The main task force administration operations centre was over in there somewhere. I never saw it. 4 Battalion was in essence so we're on the, facing the cloverleaf, we're on the left-hand side. 4 Battalion was on the top side of the cloverleaf, and 3 Battalion was further out in the other area. Then the supporting facilities, artillery engineers, ops, intel, the gasoline cowboys, we're in the, let's call that on the right-hand cloverleaf, section of the cloverleaf. I think that's about the easiest way of explaining it. And from then on, everywhere around us was completely denuded of vegetation, other than grasses and stuff like that. Bear in mind that the big battle of Long Tan was only 5-6 kilometres, about that. I'm not accurate on that. It was only about 5-6 kilometres that the big battle called Long Tan actually occurred, because the mounting of the I think it was 245D Battalion of the North Vietnamese was to attack the base. They don't know. They're inside. Actually, that's something that came to my mind. I asked my boss one day, I said, why the hell don't they have a go at us? He said, because they don't know what's in here. And that was the reason civilians were never allowed in, because they don't know what's in there. All they can see is a rubber plantation. From the outside, if you look at an aerial photograph, you can see the runways and you can see vegetation, but you can't see anything else. Whereas the Americans, they flatten everything, flatten, denude everything, which makes you as an observer on the outside clear to look in and clear to plan what you're going to do when you get in there. But the base itself was closed and vegetated, and that way gave you security, because if you're looking in you can't see anything, so what the devil's in there? It's like going to a spooky house. What's inside before you go in? You know what's outside, but what's inside?
Who were the gasoline cowboys?
The APC drivers, the tankies. The tankies, we always call them gasoline cowboys. Well, they are. They ride an iron horse with gasoline, don't they? Gasoline cowboys. Artillery were drop short. Peter's one of them. Or he was one of them. They were always the drop shorts. We were the grunts. The ginger beers were the engineers. Who else was there? 161 recce flight was just at the edge of us, because the runway went right beside us. There was a thing called the Dust Bowl at the back. It was a turnaround area for the planes, because the runway came in and it actually went uphill into a dust bowl, and they levelled it, and it was an area for the planes to turn around, and it was just dirt. So you never went near that area, because it was just a dust storm as the aircraft turned around and come back out again. It's so long ago now to remember these different areas. That's why it's important to go back, because the mind plays games. The mind confuses and twists things. And when you go back and put it in focus, the mind says, well, yeah, it's gone. You know, like I spoke to you earlier on about this closure. I'm very much a believer of closure. And you can only have closure by visiting and shouting at the devil. It's the only time you can have it. Go back and shout at the devil. And then your mind can rest. And I've found a lot of peace in my life by doing that. I'm sorry. Ooh, where'd that come from? Yeah, it's a good thing. Ooh, let's get on with something else. What else do you want to know?
Do you recall the first time you saw the Americans over there?
The goddams? Oh, yeah. They were down in Vung Tau. There's a place called Bravery, which was the nearest town to us, and it had a number of outposts between us and them. And the drive to Vung Tau was, I think, about 27 kilometres of open road, very open road. I've got an expression, they probably won't like this part, but individually, collectively they're a bunch of bloody hysterical morons. Individually they're great people. And truly, that's the best way of it. They've got a different attitude to everything. You know, we're bits of devils in our attitude, and they're sort of so punched up and gung ho and all popped up. I'm bloody fine. I'm not criticising. Please don't think that. I'm not criticising. It's just that they are different. They are different, and with all my travelling through the world, people think we're American. And when we travelled through China, we're always, when your president does this, or when the president, and I said, we don't have a president, we're Australian. Oh, are you? Oh. But we look the same, but we don't sound the same. People say all Asians look the same. They don't. I can tell you every country just by looking at the people and certain features about them. But, you know, we have the joke, you know, they all look the same, but then they say the same about us. We all look the bloody same anyway. So there it is. The American military is something to behold. The quantity of munitions, the quantity of equipment is just mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling. To see the amount of equipment that they have as against us, it's just phenomenal. And but we made do. We held our end up pretty well with what we had and the way we used it. I'm quite proud of what we did.
Before you went over there, had you ever met an American?
No, never. No. Hang on, I tell a lie. I was up the cross with a few of the boys having a beer one night, and we ran into some fellas on R&R. And as I said, individually they're really great people, but collectively they are so hysterical. They are so bloody hysterical. The Australians don't have this generally through the society. This I call it hysteria. You know, the civilian population is the same. You know, they're all the world's us type of thing, but they're not. They're only a small part of the world. Very generous. Always fascinated by us. We were unique to them. Goddamn, you're Aussies. Yeah, have this. Oh, no, I don't want that. Oh, no, I can't take that back. Yeah, here's a gun. Take this one with you. Yeah. I'll give him a gun for that hat. No, you're not getting that. Our Land Rovers were small and underpowered compared to the American equipment. You know, the American equipment's very big and powerful, which makes a big target to shoot at too. So I don't mind. I'll travel in the little one. Next.
Speaking of equipment, did most of the Aussie stuff you saw, Jeep-wise and things like that, have the red kangaroo on it?
Any American vehicle that came near our base got a kangaroo stuck on it. Our vehicles didn't have kangaroos on it. They have symbols, and if you look at the vehicle outside, you'll see each unit has a number plate, as in a number, not a number plate as we know of. That does have a number plate, of course. And then there's certain insignias, and by looking at the vehicle insignias, you can say what unit they're from within reason, if you know, of course. In the infantry battalions, after the Second World War finished, there was the 55th, 56th and 57th Infantry Battalions of the AIF, Australian Infantry Forces, were disbanded and reformed to create 1 battalion, 2 battalion and 3 battalion. And the insignia on the 1 battalion vehicle is number 55, because the bulk of the men were taken out of the 55th Battalion and formed the nucleus of the 1 battalion. From 57 55. 56 went 2 battalion. 57 went 3 battalion. And so it is a red plate, about that square, with white numbers on, and that's why you'll see 55 on vehicles. And if you see a red plate with a number on, that's an infantry battalion. If they've got a line drawn across them and different colouring, they could indicate artillery, they could indicate engineers, they could indicate any particular group. So the insignia on the vehicle indicates basically who they are and where they're from, within reason. But you've got to understand these number plates before you can decipher who they are. And a lot of people never knew. A lot of the men I spoke to never knew why we had 55. And we came from the 55th Infantry Battalion from the Second World War.
How did the Americans take it that every time they drove a Jeep anywhere near the Aussies, they got a red kangaroo?
Quite well. As I said, we were a fascination to them. We were sort of, goddamn, it's one of those sort of. They accepted us very well. There was certainly no problems there. As I said, they were very generous, but collectively they're a fairly hysterical bunch. Well, I say hysterical. Anyway, they're all pumped up. I don't know what it is. It's maybe their way of life. But I like them as people. Yeah. I've got a very good friend over there, and he's been out here to visit us.
How so? How were they hysterical?
Hysterical is probably the word I use, but other people wouldn't use it. It was like they were on a high all the time. Everything was just gung ho and go. It was there was nothing laid back about them. They were all, I don't know, they were all bloody twitchy if you ask me. But then they had a damn good reason to be too. They're loud and they're boisterous, and the world revolves around them. And okay. If that's your bag, you carry it. That's it.
What do you recall of going out on your first patrol?
I went out with a fella called Ned Kelly. He'd been there on the first tour with us. Oh, he'd been on the first tour. And the bugger went to sleep and snored. I was terrified. I don't think I ever closed my eyes from the minute I landed in Vietnam till after I came back. I might have gone to sleep, but I think my eyes are always open, and your ears are always open. And the very first time out, it's scary. You don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's out there. The mob before us, they knew, and they were pretty relaxed because they knew what was there. But for you, the first time, it's quite. I know I never went to sleep all night. I never closed my eyes. I think they were bloody glued open, actually. And nothing happened. And we were only out about 12 hours and a couple of kilometres, and came back in. It's sort of a bit of a shakedown. That was it. Everybody got to do them. That's how the base remained secure, by having these constant roving patrols out from the base.
What's sleep like in that first couple of days when you're there?
There's no such thing. I don't think you ever go to sleep. You're too much alive. You always slept with your ears open, and you're always very much aware of what was around you, any noise at all. And it took me many years to get over this. The slightest noise would wake you at first. After a while, you're young and fit, and you get on with it. Sleep was something that was rare, as in to lie down and go to sleep and feel comfortable. There was no such thing. You did lie down and go to sleep, but to feel comfortable, I don't think so. You just never knew. You just never knew what was going to happen. That's probably what's affected a lot of people. Just that sheer unknown. more than anything else.
How were the rations?
Oh, lovely. Do you want some? Yes, well, the cooks did a damn good job for what they were given. And bear in mind we had etherised eggs. We had pre-digested steaks. And I'll explain on that later. Most of the fresh rations were off by the time you got them. That's why I can't, to this very day, eat fruit salad. Because by the time the fruit arrived, it was starting to turn, and the cooks would chop it into a fruit salad, and because it was fresh, you ate it. I can't even stand sitting at the table looking at people eat fruit salad. The basic fare was what they tried. They tried to keep us on the same type of ration as we had here in Australia. It was food, and you ate it. That was about it. It was basic. It sustained life, and that's what it's designed to do. You certainly didn't get fat. You only have to look at the photos. But there was always enough to eat, and the rations when you're out, you'd already been eating tinned rations, so it's just a flow on from what you previously had. The American rations were really good. Most of their food you could eat with a spoon, because everything just came out of a can. They ate it with a spoon. They had a more varied diet than we did, because the Australian population has the greatest diversity of cuisine that I've ever seen, and the average Australian will eat, I'm not saying all Australians, will eat a number of cuisines, whereas the Americans have a very strict diet. The friend that came from America, I was amazed at how little they ate. You know, we would suggest something, oh, we've never eaten that, or we don't eat that, or whatever. And Australians would eat a horse and chase its jockey. It's about the only way to put it.
Was the base dry?
Dry?
As in alcohol-free? Or?
Oh, hell no. That was the only sedative that you could have. No, there was no spirits, unless you smuggle them in, and beer. Just before we go to the beer, etherised eggs were great. They soaked eggs in ether to preserve them so they didn't rot, and no matter what the cooks did to them, they couldn't get the ether out of the eggs. Powdered eggs. But etherised eggs, I remember them so clearly. You always had the taste of ether after you've eaten them.
What does ether taste like?
You ever smelled it? If you've smelled ether, that's what it tasted like. They did the best they could with what they were supplied. They copped a lot of shit for no reason at all, but generally they were damn good fellas and they did a good job. Bearing in mind what they were given to prepare for you. Never saw the things that you consider as normal to that way of life at that time, of course. You never saw that in any of that. Ice was like gold. You know, ice was used to chill the beer. They had to be careful where they got it from, because of if it was made out of polluted water, then everybody got sick. An army marches on its stomach. So you have to be very careful. Even today, if you travel in Asia, you have to be very careful of what you eat and where you eat, because we have one of the best societies in the world. We can drink out of a tap, and there's a lot of countries you can't do that. We can drink tap water in any city of Australia, and it might taste a bit odd, particularly the up around Rockhampton way. It's some of the worst water I've ever tasted, but it's still potable, it's still drinkable. But over there, you had to be very careful. Our water came out of a well just outside the camp, and it was pumped and purified and served to you. It's diversifying a little. Let's get back to the beer. We had 3 beers. We had VB in green cans. We had Foster's, something out of Sydney. Was Foster's originally from Sydney? Can't remember. No, that's a Victorian beer. Something from Sydney. I'll think of it in a minute. And 4X. And of the 3 beers, 4X was the worst. It never travelled, and the cans actually were rusty from the climate, whereas the VB and the Sydney beer, I can't think of what it is now, their cans were rusty. Sorry, the 4X cans actually had rust on the outside of them. They were rusty by the time you got them. But the others travelled well, so you tend to drink the other states' beer. Of course, you'd never admit it. And there was beer until you misbehaved and you weren't allowed to have any. That was the biggest punishment you could get, was have the beer turned off. Then all sorts of things used to go on. The boys used to play up a fair bit if the beer got turned off.
Was it beer rations or?
No, generally not. Not when you were back in the base. There was none outside, but when you were back in the base, no. It was a sedative in effect. It was a way of getting away from the reality. You weren't drunk all the time. I mean, to say you still had a job to do the next day, and there was no forgiveness if you couldn't stand up and do your job. None at all. Not even from my 21st birthday. I got told I still had to work, even though I was as sick as a dog with a hangover. But that's it. It was there. It was as much as you wanted, I suppose you could say, at the time. And I still can't think of that New South Wales beer.
Rations, maybe?
Could have been Riches. I don't think Riches, but it was one of the regular ones. But I think brands have changed over the years now too.
Where was the drinking done on the base?
In each company was a boozer, and it was just more a tin shed with a concrete floor and some chairs. It was done there, and you weren't allowed to take it away from there. Well, you weren't allowed to get caught taking it away from there. The 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught.
What sort of goings on would have to happen for the beer to be cut off?
Oh, a bit of bad attitude, slackness in work details, general grumpiness. Most of it came from work not being done and a bad attitude, and then they'd turn it off.
And then blokes obviously would find a way around that?
Of course. We're Australian. Under the floor of the tent I had a sand pit, and I built you can say, a sand esky, and so we used to hide stuff down in there. We did have Alan Bridge mix us up Old Spice metho and some boot polish. We used to drink that if we were on the dry. It wasn't bad, because you had to be drunk to drink it too, of course. So then that didn't matter, did it?
I was going to ask, does it taste as good as it sounds?
You're too drunk to care. You're too drunk to care. But basically, there was generally not a lot of drinking went on in the lines. It was, you respected what you got, and you also were responsible for being aware of where you are, and responsible to your fellow man too, for that matter.
Was there ever any swapping with the Americans going on with stuff like that?
We never saw the Americans. I would have seen more Americans than the average fellow from my battalion, because I travelled with the job that I did. And there would have been the odd trade when they did come in contact with them, but generally no. There were Americans outside the Nui Dat base in an artillery unit, and whether the D Company, who was out there at the time with the Americans, had much barter or trade with them, I don't know. You must understand that each company is an individual thing in itself, and although collectively we are a battalion, you still have an area of responsibility and duties, and although it's like a hand, all the fingers are part of the hand and they all work together, but they are still individual fingers, and that's what a battalion is. It's all individual companies, but like a hand, it still opens and closes collectively.
What were your accommodations like on the base?
Oh, wonderful. A tent top with sandbag walls, and for the lucky ones had a timber floor. That was it.
Did you have a timber floor?
Yep. Yeah, we were one of the lucky ones. Yeah, we had. I think most of the boys had, by that stage, we had replaced 7 Battalion, and gradually, I think 5 founded the base. I could be wrong in this part. 5 Battalion founded the base when they went through the plantation to clear it, and then they decided that would be the base of Nui Dat for the Australians, operations in Phúc Tuy province. And gradually that base had been built up by the time we arrived. The fellas who you will talk to if you get the opportunity in 1 battalion on the first tour, which was 65, 66, were directly housed with the Americans, and they would be able to give you a lot more of what it was like to work with the Americans. But Australia by that stage had its own province to control and be responsible for the field of operations throughout that area, and we're talking like a state. And really there weren't a lot of Americans to be found other than at the major centres. The air support came from America and supplies came from America and that type of thing, but generally we were self-sufficient and responsible for our area.
So how many guys were in your tent?
Three of us, yeah. 3 or 4, depending on who was coming and going at the time. It's a thing that the Australian Army does. 2 men are not allowed to be in the tent together in case they go a bit like that. So there's got to be a minimum of 3. From memory, there was 4 of us. Some of this is a bit vague. I remember Jim was across from me, and Bob was there. I'm pretty sure there was only 3. For some reason, there was only 3 in our tent. Yeah.
How big? What kind of area are these tents?
Seeing how you're a metric girl, I'd probably say about 4 by 4 metres. Yeah, about 4 by 4 metres.
And do you personalise the inside of your tent?
Oh, you can have a look there, but there's this. You're not exactly carrying everything you had to carry, right? So you really didn't take too much with you. You took a change of clothing, civilian clothing, and apart from that, everything else was supplied. You might have a photograph, but generally no. It was pretty bare, but it was. People don't realise how little it needs to survive, and you learn that. You learn that very quickly, what it takes to survive. You need meals and shelter. Shelter is a plastic sheet, and meal is what you find to eat, and that's what sustains life. And you talk to anybody who's been through the misery of war, particularly the civilian population, and you'll be amazed what you can survive on, or how little you need to survive. 1 set of clothes, so long as you've got shelter to get out of the elements, and something to eat. That sustains life. It's not great, but you live. And that's the way life is for the entire world. And there's a lot of countries in the world where people barely subsist on just exactly what I spoke of. Shelter and food, nothing more. No riches.
For you personally, what personal effects did you have with you?
Very little. I had a photograph of Judy. I don't know. I could look at that photo and you might see something in the photo, but very, very little actually. There wasn't room for it for a start off. There wasn't a need for it. The army supplied you what you need to survive with. That's basically. The odd fellow had the odd thing or two, but generally nothing too much. You don't need it. It's too damn cumbersome to move around for a start off, and remember you could be made to move at a minute's notice. So it really was. There was nothing. You never sat on another person's bed. It was the only area, unless you're invited, of course. It was the only area that belonged to you, and every soldier will tell you the same thing. Yeah, we used to sit on each other's bed, but you'd never sit there without being aware or being invited. It's just not a done thing.
Their Tet was...
Yeah, Tet had erupted.
Yeah, can you tell us?
It started at about late February sometime. The biggest part of Tet was in Saigon itself, so we didn't get to see it. The biggest area of Tet was Saigon and a place further up. Although the whole country was inflamed, more than normal, Saigon and a couple of American bases were the worst hit for it, because that's where they mounted their main attacks, up near the Coochie tunnels. And although it erupted right across the country, I don't believe the Australian area was that influenced by it. There was quite a lot of bombardment down at a place called Bravery, which is the village outside of the base. You'll often see pictures of where they've rocketed, and there was a big concrete building, and it was the only substantial building in the whole of the area. And when I say the area, I'm talking sort of a 30-mile radius. And it was mortared, and the gunships came in and rocketed it, and there was a lot of people killed there. A lot of our fellows, one of the battalions walked into minefields in there, and a lot of them were injured there. And that was probably the biggest area of activity for Tet that we would have been affected by. But it was mostly Saigon. They were trying to show that they could get Saigon at that time.
When you're doing patrols, what are the things that make Australians stand apart from the Americans with the way we do things like that?
Lack of numbers. Less of numbers, more active in what you're doing, more focused in what you're doing. There's no radios, there's no bunching up, there's no smoking, there's no talking. The Americans work on the superiority of numbers, we work on stealth. The Americans depend on percentages of loss. We work on a percentage of none. We are there to win, not to lose, or have losses. The Americans have a grandiose idea of the way things should be run, whereas we as a small nation and a small military force work on entirely different attitudes, and we always work within the range of artillery. We're never outside of artillery. And it's just a totally different attitude of the Australian serviceman to the American almighty. That's the difference. We can't afford those types of tactics, and we don't use them. We never have. And we were more attuned to guerrilla warfare because of it. Our training and our belief of warfare was akin to that type of warfare, and that's why our losses are so little and the Americans are so high, because they just keep on pouring something in until the objectives are achieved, whereas we aren't frightened to pull back and get you later on. Well, you walk around the side of the building and club you with a bit of limb.
Inevitably, where would you find yourself within a patrol when you went out?
I was machine gun. I usually carried the machine gun. I was very good with weapons. I always copped the machine gun. A battalion is made up of companies and platoons, and each platoon is then made up of sections. Each section was allocated so many types of firearms, machine guns, rocket grenade launchers, and it just depended on the operations of the company and where they were operating from. in the formations that they would use. There's many and varied, depending on the density of jungle or open plains. Of course, the further the ground is open, the wider the spacing, because, as the old saying used to be, spread out one hand grenade can get the lot of you. And it's very true, so you never bunch up. Whereas the Americans have this attitude of, we're big and mighty and there's a lot of us and we're going through right up the middle and it doesn't matter. Instead of having to think about it and come around the back door and knocking on the back door, they go up the front door all the time. That's the difference.
How did being on the MG make you feel?
Good. When you get shit scared, it's good. When it gets rattling, it's real good. Yes. I ripped my hand open in an ambush one night, and the gun was fired, and it ripped all the skin across my side of my hand, and never thought anything of it. And about 25 years later, I was working on a car and tore my hand again. That night I had a bunch of nightmares. It lies dormant. And what's happening, and this is probably why it's becoming of such focus here in Australia, as you get older, the idea of getting on with life and leaving the past to where it belongs, it's harder to suppress. And as you get older, you can't. As the saying is, we're 6 foot tall and bulletproof when we're 20, but when you get to 50, you just can't fight it internally anymore, and this is where things start to happen, and this is why you see so many men are now falling over from what has happened, mixed in with probably chemical poisoning. So there's a twofold exercise coming through there.
Because some people would possibly say, as far as the MG was concerned, that you're going to draw fire.
Yes, that can happen. Barry Thomas had that exact experience. He when they got hit, he said the best thing that happened is the bloody thing didn't work, and he said that they stopped firing at me and turned their fire away from us. That's how he survived, but the fellas around him were killed. So it can do one of two things. It's like tracer. Tracer's a two-way street. You can see where it's going, well, within reason, because it doesn't usually do what it does, but you can always see where it's coming from too, and so that can draw fire. So tracer and machine gun link was 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 with tracer. So of course there was a fairly good point to aim for in the darkened time as to where it was coming from, because it's just a big white line leaving you and arriving at them. So of course if they're not getting stitched, anybody further away from it has got a nice aiming point to come back to.
And were you using a different colour tracer to them?
No, phosphorus just burns white. I don't believe I've ever seen phosphorus burn any other colour but white. The colour that you see on the tip of the bullet is to indicate that there is more inside of it, and it could be incendiary or tracer or HE or whatever it is, depending on the colour of the tip indicates what's in it. So tracer is tracer, and as far as I know, unless somebody can correct me, it's white. And when you first see it, you think it's very pretty, but then when you realise what it is, it's not.
And how did you find the M60s?
I had no problem with it. I had no problem with it. When John Gorton came to visit the battalion, one of the armourers made a complaint that they were old, worn out, dilapidated, and there was quite a kerfuffle over that. And all of the machine guns from the battalion were collected and tested to please John Gorton, that is, that what had been suggested to him about the dilapidated equipment really wasn't true. But I've seen an M60 blow the gas plug at the bottom. There's been a flame that long coming out of the bottom, and it still kept on running. And that's with 4 or 5 men standing. They did a test on it, and with link, and their arms spread. I think there were 5 fellas with link, and it just kept on rattling. I mean, it cooked the damn thing, but yeah. They fired in a cone shape, not like a Bren gun, which fires a very accurate fire. And the cone is purely for advancing infantry, as in multiple targets. That's why it fires in a cone shape. It's not like firing a rifle. It does spread itself around whether you want it to or not.
And what sort of group bursts could you get off with that? Like how smaller a group could you get off?
You become very skilled with them. You could get away at least 3 That's probably about the smallest number you could get. When you got excited, you forgot to let go. So you ran out very quickly. But I think the weaponry for the day and the time was adequate. I feel the AR-16 was underpowered in its bullet mass. It was only 55 grains, and I think that was a little bit underpowered. The AK-47 had a 30 calibre round, which was more adequate in penetrating jungle, as the M16 deflects fairly easy. But horses for courses, it's what you get. If you want to carry something light, then you have that. You can criticise it, but it's what you're issued with. Today they have the Stye. It's moved up to a 62 grain projectile with a tungsten tip in it, the same as a 50 calibre round had, and that has a far greater penetration as far as the bullet is concerned.
And did you find, because you were carrying the 60, that you would maybe carry a little bit less of something else amongst the patrol?
No, you usually get whatever rations. You've got to be self-sufficient. You could get parted, and you've got to be self-sufficient. The fellas in the companies who really got stuck into the big long range patrols, they could better answer that. But from what I've spoken with them, they seem to say they were given no compensations for that. I know during training there was no compensation for it. You carried what was necessary and what was sort of allocated, and that's what it. Number 2 carried extra link and his own firearm. You could never have enough, but then you can have too much and not move too.
Did you always have the same number 2?
No, because I had varied patrols. I would have different people from time to time, but I knew what I was doing and I felt safe. That's why I always carried it. When I say I felt safe, I felt as safe as you could feel, put it that way, because I knew how to use it. And, I proved during my training that for some reason firearms are very natural to me. I still to this day train a lot of people with firearms, so it's I remember they had a thing called an F1, which was the most useless piece of shit I'd ever seen. And I hadn't seen one of them since corps training, and I was sent to Canungra years later, and they produced one of these from under a blanket, pulled apart, and I nearly got it back together again with a gas mask on. There was only one slight turn I hadn't to get the bolt to, and then I could fire that single shot or bursts. It's just something that I was able to do. And to this day I can still do it.
And what about the SLR? Did you still had your personal weapon?
I carried a fully automatic SLR, which is unheard of, because my job was I used to escort the boss everywhere he went, and it was necessary for me to have the firepower without the bulk. The armourer converted my SLR to fully automatic, so that every time we travelled, and we got shot at a few times, I at least had the firepower with us, because there was only 2 of us in the vehicle, and we would travel in a lot of areas where we shouldn't, but wasn't those sort of things were needed in those days. And I found with the SLR, it's a very accurate weapon, except on automatic. The first 3 rounds would be on the target, and the rest it's just too light, just used to bounce around. But having the convenience of it was damn good to know that it was there in case you needed it. Then, of course, the magazines emptied pretty damn fast once you hit that, and you could overcook them if you weren't careful, if you got too excited.
On the fully auto one that you had, did it have a heavier barrel as well? Or?
No, that was the AR. Mine was an SLR. The AR was a support weapon, usually kept at the base, but it's a heavier barrel and detachable barrel. The SLRs are made fully automatic. You only need, I won't explain what, but you only need a couple of items to be moved to turn them into fully automatic weapons. But they are very inaccurate, and there's no one good shot's worth 10 missed shots. That's the theory of it.
And did you ever use the M60 to the point where you had to change barrels on that?
No, fortunately, no. I'm very pleased to say I didn't. Because once they get red hot, those things, you've got to have asbestos gloves to pull them off, and then you're hoping to Christ that the bloody thing's going to work again. It's theory is a wonderful thing until you put it into practice.
And then when it was back, your gun positions back at Nui Dat, were they mounted on their proper?
There was always arcs of fire, and you were responsible for a certain arc of fire from wherever you were positioned around the perimeter of the base, and that extended right around the whole of Nui Dat. There was arcs of fire for everywhere, and it was the responsibility of the occupying group to be responsible for that area. And we didn't know, I only found out later on, they used to fly over Nui Dat quite a lot and photograph to see if they could pick up anything that changed on the ground. And one night, and I can't remember when it happened, but I can remember the artillery just absolutely went berserk one night. And it woke us up. It was really unusual, and it was heavy firing, and it went on for a long time. And we found out the next day that the bird dog had picked up a rocket launching base being dug, and it was only a couple of kilometres off the base. And they'd watched them day after day, and every night they would come in and dig it, and in the morning they'd try and cover it up. And every night they'd be back and dig it. And they waited till it was just at the point of completion, and then they opened the artillery up on it and blew it. So, but yeah, we were very close to being hit. And these are the things you don't know. These things are kept in the control echelons and the general people. You don't know. See, this is it.
Well, you've spoken already about how you felt like you slept. Oh, you didn't sleep. Your eyes were open and your ears were open the entire time you were there. But do you find yourself sometimes being that rooted that the guns could go off and you just sleep through it?
Yeah, that does happen. Yeah, that can happen. The point of exhaustion takes over, and the body says, "I don't care, and you do. You go into it, but it's very frightening. It happened to me, and it frightens you because you think, my God, if something happened, what the hell? And here I am in non compos mentis type of thing. So yeah, it was a worry, but it does. Exhaustion plays a big part in it because you are 100% adrenaline the whole time. Even when you're asleep, you're awake type of thing. Your ears are definitely awake. You can hear a cat walk across soft tissue.
Did blokes ever go troppo with the build-up of that sort of tension?
Yeah, regularly happen. Yeah. Might be your turn next, so you're never worried about it. If it got too bad, they would give them something, but normally the answer's no, because everything's kept inside. Men are people who keep things inside, and so it was. You weren't looked down upon, but it was something you didn't do. You didn't let yourself fall apart because it didn't help, didn't cure anything, didn't help the people around you. So just you tried your best never to let it happen.
Was there anything to help besides the beer ration? Were there any ways that they tried to give blokes a break or cheer them up or anything like that?
There was a thing called R&C, which is rest and convalescence, and that was done in Vung Tau, and you went down there for 2 or 3 days. That was when it was available. In other words, depending on the work activities and the commitments, R&C was available, and they would ship them down in a company at a time. Of course, the boys really ran amok when they got down there. And then R&R, of course, was a week or 7 days, I think it was. And you were allocated to nominate where you would like to go. I went to Taipei. Different fellows came home and had a lot of difficulty coming back. It was a rule if you went back to Australia that you would bring back a dozen fresh eggs, carry them on the plane with you all the way back, so you didn't have to eat etherised eggs. That was quite funny. Hey, someone's got eggs. Oh, beauty. Internally, there was always the volleyball and a good fight. That usually got rid of a lot of pent-up emotion.
How often would there be fights?
No, not a lot of times, and everybody, the next day it was completely forgotten. There was no animosity. everybody really understood the strain that they were under. And if somebody went troppo and chopped up their mattress with a bayonet like one bloke did, we'll just turn the mattress over. What the hell? As I said, it could be you next time.
How accurate do films like The Odd Angry Shot portray?
It wasn't too bad actually. A bit clinical, but it wasn't too bad. I was fairly impressed with Graham Kennedy's performance in that. It wasn't too bad, and it's been a long time since I've seen it. You can't, as I've said before, you can't put reality on a make-believe stage. It just doesn't fit. Reality's too big. It just doesn't fit, and everybody perceives something differently. It doesn't matter what it is. No matter what you and I look at together, you will see something different to me. So, but it wasn't too bad. It was along those lines. Yeah.
And the special role that you got, driving the boss around, how did that happen?
Sheer bad luck, I think. I was very good with weapons, and they were looking for someone, and I got asked would I go and have a talk to him, and I went and had a talk to him, and he said, yeah, all right. And obviously he'd been through a number of people and looked at different abilities, and particularly in the weapons area, and I was lucky enough to get the job. And I say lucky enough to get it because it withdrew me from a lot of the real bad stuff. I was able to do my job and really meant to do your job because you knew the fellas up the front really needed it.
So this is not his Batman?
Yes, it was indirectly his Batman, yep. Yeah, that was only a minor part of it. Batman come driver come storeman come dog's body come you name it, and I did the whole bloody lot. Wherever he had to go I had to be with him type of thing, and if we got in the shit it was my job to get out of it, and but in the meantime that was only a very minor part, the Batman side of it. There was loading helicopters and sorting deceased estates, and there was a lot of things in it.
Did you enjoy this role?
Yeah, it was a job. Somebody had to do it. It was a job, and I was doing it, and I wasn't dissatisfied with it. I still got to be active outside the base at the same time. I missed going away with the main body. I do say I missed that, and. Everybody gets a job, and if you allocated that job, you do it. They don't how can I put it? They don't ask you whether you like it or not. If that's the job you're given, you do it, and you try and do it to the best of your ability because it's a job that's got to be done, and it supports the rest of the fellas.
Sorting deceased blokes' gear, that must have been a terrible job, was it?
Yeah, there was a white box would come down if somebody was killed. There was a white timber box painted with their name on it, and their artefacts were put into it, and it was basically to look and be sure that something that shouldn't be returned to the family was in the box. And yeah, it was very distressing. There were a couple of highlights. There was one fellow's gear that came down, and there'd always been this weird noise. Nobody could ever work out what this noise was. It was really strange, this strange noise. And when we went through his gear, we found he had purloined, for want of a better word, or stolen, a big brass fire hose nozzle that we used to have at Holsworthy at the barracks. And when he got drunk, he used to go out and play it like a trumpet. He'd hide behind the trees and play it, and then everybody's like, what's that bloody noise? And that's what it was. It was this big brass fire hydrant hose. Yeah. When their gear came back, it had to be sorted and burnt, and there was a number of times going through that, you sort of, really wasn't what you want to be doing. Throw it in the pit to burn it, and there'd be grenades in it. The bloody things would go off, and the boss would be up you because there's shrapnel flying around the place when there shouldn't have been, and that was part and parcel of the job, I suppose.
Is anybody hurt with that?
No, but there was a lot of asses kicked. Ammunition going off. Yeah, it was, didn't happen all the time, but every now and again it would happen. Stuff would get thrown in and burnt, and next minute there's fireworks had started.
Would it be common practice if a bloke was killed that his mates would go through his gear first and grab whatever they needed?
Oh, no. Oh, no, we should know that. No. No, it in those sort of circumstances, you would find, out of a matter of respect, that wouldn't be done. The senior officer of the group might look through the stuff, but generally no. Oh, no. No, this business about the watch was always a joke, if you get killed, can I have your watch? That was just a bit of levity to get over the tense.
Yeah, I don't mean that to sound like in a horrible way, but I know soldiers are often struggling to get gear.
No, we were supplied. There was plenty of supplies. There wasn't that need.
And also, was it the blokes got sent, or their families were sent home a fresh uniform? Is that right?
That I can't answer. I don't know. I only saw the boxes when they were shipped out with personal effects in them. I can't answer. I don't believe that's true because I've never heard of it. The Americans fold a flag and hand it to the family. I think that's very good. I'd like to see that come into Australia, actually. I'm very bitter towards the government who buried men overseas. I believe if you serve for Australia, you should be returned to Australia to be buried, whether you're cremated or buried, it doesn't matter. A number of fellows were buried overseas, and I just totally disagree with that. I think you should, if it's good enough for the government to send you, it was good enough to bring them home. And I can understand that some families would say, well, we don't want to go through it again. We've had the shock and we're over the shock and all that type of thing. But I still believe everybody should be returned. That's just a personal belief of mine. I feel very strongly about it.
Would there be any sort of funeral service at Nui Dat if blokes?
There was always a company service when it was possible, yeah. And one of the fellows that was with us, Harry White, who was killed, I think he's buried in Kranji War Cemetery up in Singapore. I think that's where Harry is, yeah. But I still believe he should have come home.
So how do blokes deal with, if a mate gets killed, something like that?
Same as everybody. Everybody has their way of grieving, and it differs from person to person. Some want to fight, some want to cry. Some go completely numb. Some don't want to talk, some do want to talk. It's an individual. Grieving is an individual thing, and it can manifest itself in many ways. The worst way it can manifest is to be bottled and explode at an inappropriate time. And that does happen even today in our normal society. I saw that regularly as a police officer, where families would do the most unusual things when they were advised that a loved one was suddenly died in a road accident, particularly. The reactions of people are so vast and so different. I can't answer it other than to say that. That's a personal thing.
Because a lot of blokes, you just wouldn't have time to really...
That's right, you don't have. You get on with it, and later on you think about it, and it's something that comes out usually when you've been drinking. And then one thing about alcohol, it was a release. It could release the demon in you, and that was the only thing that was available. There was no psychologist or psychiatrist, and there was none of this holding your hand stuff. And you would talk about it, if you were closely related, closely working with the person, you'd be affected more than people sort of the next company over. And as I said, each company was a separate unit within itself, but like a hand, it all works together. And you always knew these fellas. To say the fellas I was with, a lot of them were killed. The only reason I'm alive today is I'd been shipped to this other area. I think there was 2 or 3 of them that went back for the second tour and were killed on the second tour. And they were the fellas we looked up to before we went. My section, or the section I'd been in, it virtually was decimated. And I think there's probably only one of the original fellas left, and he's somewhere in Australia. I don't know where he is.
You mentioned RNC before. Did you go down to Vung Tau?
Yeah, he went down to Vung Tau. Yes, there was a few old times down there. I'll tell you a story about RNC. It was, I'd become good friends with some of the SAS fellas because I had to travel up and do things, interchange with them on various matters. And so a couple of them knew me anyway. We got to Vung Tau this night, this day. And we usually all hung around together, but somehow I got separated and ended up with these pair of bloody rogues. And they said, we know this joint, it's great, we'll go there. So we're half full of stew, of course. We're walking up these big flights of concrete stairs, and they went up about 2 stories at least. But there was no railing, so you had to be careful you didn't fall over the edge. And we got up inside, and this place was thumping like a sock full of cane toads. It was going. Anyway, Otis Redding was sitting on the dock of the bay. The words are indelibly printed in my mind. And we walked in, there was just the 3 of us, and we got to the middle of the dance floor, and it was very dark around the periphery of the dance floor. And all of a sudden I realised that there was no noise except Otis Redding singing, sitting on the dock of the bay. And it was a black bar. And I thought, oh no, we are dead. Nobody spoke, and it was either turn and run and be killed before you got to the door, or keep going. And this other pair of fools with me. Anyway, we got to the bar. I think Speedy said, give us 3 fucking beers, and they heard the accent, and the place gradually went back to what it was doing. And oh no. I said, you bastards, you knew this was like this? Yeah, but it's a great bar, isn't it? Because the Americans were segregated. They were cohesive in their unit and working, but they segregated. Black and white was still segregated in those days, and it was very noticeable. In the bars or in any of the outs off the base type areas, that there was segregation, and it was not the thing that a white person would do, to walk into a black bar. You just didn't do that in those days, you know. I must have died about 3 times between the middle of the dance floor and the bar. And I just stood at the bar, and there was a big Negro fella standing there talking to me, and he was as high as a kite on marijuana. And he was talking, and I'm sort of looking to make sure I could get to the door in time. I don't know where KJ went. He went somewhere, and Speedy sat down and played cards, and they dealt from the bottom of the deck up their sleeve. They let him win $1, they let him lose $1. It was just a very polite way of saying, well, you know, thank you very much, but we really don't want you to be here, but we don't want to be rude. You know. And eventually he got the message, and we had a few more drinks. And the reason there was no rail going down the stairs is that every time they threw somebody out, they used to grab whatever the rail was left to stop themselves going down. So that was RNC. We went to the Badco Club. When back in '99, I went to what was left of the Badco Club, and there is only a swimming pool. There's a big swimming pool built. And I took a tile and got chased by the Vietnamese, of course, for stealing a tile off the edge of the swimming pool, which was a complete hole in the ground now, dirty and so forth. And I brought that back to Australia as a memento. And that was in '99, and then last year I took it to the Pandanus, which is the Vietnam Veterans Day up in the Gulf of Carpentaria, and I put it on the memorial up there, and it's just a plain white tile from the swimming pool of the Peter Badco Club. Yeah, so I was happy to find a home for it. I felt that it was the right place to put it. So we were allowed to wander around as groups with the fellas. There was Lenny Rogash and the rest of us, and And you'd sort of stagger in and out of bars and generally just run amok and make a fool of yourself, and then you had to be back inside the base at a certain time. The curfew, I think the curfew was about 11 o'clock, but you could get into a lot of trouble between now and then. And wherever you were secured, that's where you went back to. And I think you had about 3 days of that. Down what they call the back beach, which was barbed wire and mined in certain areas. And today is Vung Tau. Today is the surface paradise of Saigon. There's a big 4-lane highway going down there, and it's where all the hotels are, and that's where people go to have their holidays from Saigon, or which is Ho Chi Minh City these days. So that was the Badco Club, which was right on the water. You're allowed to go uptown and try and keep out of as much trouble as you could. And eventually you got poured back onto the trucks and sent back to the base and started back all over again.
What about the prostitutes that were there?
Yes, there were plenty. By the way, the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese who were fighting us would take R&C there as well, but it was sort of, nobody does any shooting around town type of thing. It's not really the appropriate place to be doing it. I'm sure there was the odd occasion things did happen. But yes, the bar girls were there. Asia is, in the entire part of Asia, prostitution's a way of life. It's not a sin. And there were prostitutes there. If you wanted to avail yourself of that type of thing, well, it was there and readily available. It was entirely up to you. It wasn't compulsory, put it that way. I had my 21st birthday in Vung Tau. That was a bit of a turnout. They sent me down to, because we'd been in country about 3 weeks and I turned 21. And they poured us all into the back of they poured us all into a short wheelbase Land Rover. There was about 5 of us, I think, went down on this one. And the idea was to get me as drunk as they possibly could and then bring me back, which they did in an open vehicle in stinging hot sun. And we got into a shoot-up on the way back, which wasn't really a shoot-up, but we didn't really know. And got back to the base, and that night they gave me a bottle of champagne, and I drank that. Nobody else would drink it because men don't drink those sort of things. And I had the worst nightmares I've ever had, and the next day I was so sick I thought, I hope I never have to be 21 again. That was my 21st birthday.
Can I ask you, how is a shoot-up not a shoot-up?
We were travelling back along the... It's like a very marshy area, but the road was sort of built through it. And there was a firefight going on up ahead. And we pulled up and flew out of the vehicles because it was on for young and old. And eventually, when all the firing died down and we tried to find out what we were shooting at, these fools were trying to shoot at a bird about 300 yards out in the post, and we thought, because of the direction of fire is where's everything's happening, So that's when a shoot-up isn't a shoot-up. That was all part of my 21st birthday present. And we ended up, by the way, with no ammunition to drive the rest of the distance back. So it was something that I've learnt. You never fire the last magazine until you know you have to.
And what about HEP rolls?
Because our rations were brought from secure sources, there was very little food poisoning because you just didn't eat, locally type of thing. I lived in Singapore for 2 years and I ate off the streets there and we never got sick once. But over there, with the heat, most of the food goes off, and of course, because they're poor people, they still process it. And if you're silly enough to buy it, you're going to end up... fellas ended up with bloody hepatitis C and all sorts of stomach ailments, but the doctors were well prepared for that. With the medics, the company medics were prepared for it. They had the usual Lomatil and all that type of stuff to clear it up. But yeah, and ice. You never drank out of a glass. And because over there what they would do is they would put the ice in the glass and then pour the beer in it. Now the glass has been washed in dirty water. The ice has been made with dirty water, but the beer was hot and coming out of a can. It was as clean as you could get type of thing. So that was another way you could innocently catch it. So yeah, you could end up with stomach bugs pretty easy.
So how do you get around that? You just drink warm beer out of the can, do you?
No, you drank it out of the bloody dirty glass. I took the chance. So yeah, you did end up pretty crook sometimes. But that was part and parcel of it. Glass over there, and even parts today. Glass, particularly up in Hanoi in '99, I noticed glass was worth more than the contents. Glass was very hard to get, very rare. And when we're up in Hanoi, we would go down to the local shop and drink in the local shop, because no matter how much money you offered them, they wouldn't let you take the bottles away. They had to account for those bottles to go back. So you can imagine going back for 30 odd years, glass was just so crucial. And so if you got a bottle, you drank it out of the bottle, but you took the chance half the time and drank it if it was dirty or not. It didn't matter.
When we were talking about the Americans before, about the difference between the Australian base and the American base, and the Americans having locals there, what was the rule, I guess, if a local came onto the base or tried?
They didn't. There was no rule. They didn't. It's as simple as that. If they were brought in at all, they would have been brought in by the upper echelon areas, taken to secured areas, and then would depart straight away from that area. They were not, as I said, in the whole 12 months I was there, I only saw one, and he was a high-ranking officer of the Arvin, and that's it. And he was being shown very selective areas. He wouldn't have been shown anything of note, as in operational matters, and then he would have been whisked out. The answer is there were none. Not during the period I was there. I do believe the last battalion in there may have had some on the base, but it's not normal for Australians to have civilians intermixed on operations, particularly on operational matters.
Did you have any interaction with locals outside the base?
No, very little. I tried to take a photograph of a girl one day, and they're very superstitious of, if you take a photograph of them, these are the village people, that you take their soul, so they would never allow you to photograph them. It was only the more, how can I say, liberal ones that would allow a photograph to be taken. But apart from that, you had no contact with them at all, other than R&C in Bungtown. This is the image that's been portrayed by the American media and the American films. It just didn't happen. Not for us. It didn't happen.
You were discussing your duties before, such as escorting the boss and having to deal with the effects of guys that had been killed in action. What were some of the other duties that you had?
Loading, unloading. I often would be given the job of driving between the base, the various areas of machinery, particularly starlight scopes that they used, would be damaged, getting them across to be repaired and picking them up again. Doing the odd sods and ancillaries that needed to be done to keep the place functioning. It could be anything from a visit to the hospital to loading a helicopter to unloading to there was no set routine. It's just you were there and you did it, and it was generally my job to do those types of things because I had the vehicle. I always had a vehicle made available for me to do these things with, whereas the average person wouldn't have a vehicle.
Being in HQ, obviously you're sort of...
No, I wasn't in headquarters. I was further down the line. Oh. Headquarters is another area further up in amongst the main battalion area. That's mostly where the operational areas were planned. We were more along the lines of supply on demand, that type of thing.
Being involved in that supply and demand, obviously you're sort of a large part of what keeps things functioning.
Yes.
How are you looking on those responsibilities at the time?
Bearing in mind I was only a young soldier, I didn't have too much to do other than to do I was the slave, not the master. It was very important that stuff would be available, and it had to get out when it was called for, and then it had to be reprogrammed so that it was ready to go again. It was just a continuous flow of equipment going through.
How are you thinking though of how those responsibilities fit in with what the guys are doing that are sort of...
If they don't get it, they can't use it. If they can't use it, they're in a lot of trouble. Without supply, you can't function out in the field. It's as simple as that. It's just common sense. If you don't get supplies of materials, then you can't manufacture, can you? That's the way it works. And if these men weren't receiving what they were requiring, then there's no way the place could operate. You couldn't operate in the field. Simple as that. You've got to realise what it takes to keep a man in the field, between clothing, food, shelter, ammunition, all types of resources, compasses being lost, mapping. Hell, I could go on and on and on. You know, just everything had to pass through this area, or be ordered by the clerks. There were clerical staff, and they would be ordering equipment to be supplied, and some of it would go direct, some of it would come through us. It would go up to the Chinooks and be loaded on the Chinooks if they had a particular big lift out at one time. There was occasions when we would visit the hospital and visit people for certain reasons that were in hospital. And, it would be my job to be down there. As I said, I drove the boss, and he would do the interviews down in the hospitals on certain matters rose. Is
that a heavy feeling of being responsible for the guys that are out in the field?
I think everybody felt the same, and it was just a matter of it was a job, and you did it, and you hoped to God you did it right, because you knew if you didn't, things would stop at the other end, and you just couldn't allow that to happen. There was just no such thing as you couldn't do it. You had to do it. There was none of this feeling tired or anything like that. It just had to be done. And you never thought any more about it. And I'm sure everybody felt the same.
So while you're doing that job, are you also still doing patrols or sentry?
Yep.
Or?
Yep. Yeah, we were still doing sometimes up to 4 days out, depending on where they sent us, going for a bit of a swan around the boondocks and setting up ambushes and that type of thing. Yeah, that was still going on. That was all mixed into it. You're not just one standalone little cog. You're only a cog in a very big machine with lots of cogs, and it's important that everybody does their job, because if they don't, the place grinds to a halt. You only got to have one cog go wrong and the whole machine stops. So that's the easiest way of explaining it.
Were there many accidents that occurred?
Self-induced or accidents?
Well, either or.
There was the occasional one. I think one of the boys, I'm not quite sure on this, one of the boys got burnt to death in his tent because everybody was drunk and threw a smoke grenade into the tent and set fire. These tents would go up in about 17 seconds. You know, they're very volatile pieces of equipment. And he was too drunk to get out of bed, and he was barbecued. That was a bit of a disaster for one of the boys. There's a couple of accidental shootings, and actually they changed it from accidental to unauthorised. They changed it from an AD to a UD to overcome the legalities of it, because it was suggested if they could have accidents they're not properly trained. So the government now calls it, or the military now call it, unauthorised rather than accidental. You weren't authorised. There was a fella shot on my patrol just before we went through the wire. One of the rounds went off and got him through the arm. I'm not criticising this, it's just carelessness on the weapons handling part, and these things happen, and hopefully nobody's in the way when it does, but it does happen, and that's the reality of life. That is just the way things are. It will happen. We have accidents, industrial accidents here in Australia, big ones. And when they happen, of course, everybody goes into the I didn't do it type mode, and nobody wants to know about it. And there's an investigation, and somebody has to be found guilty. There it is. So you tried not to have an accident, as you put it, or an authorised discharge in particular. Fellas chop fingers off accidentally with falling off trucks with rings on, but that stopped very early in the piece. Crates fall on people and people get injured. It's part and parcel of life. It happens every day here in your own city. the misbehaviour of people towards themselves, in other words, deliberately shooting themselves, like probably once I know of, where I was on the investigation of that, and that's sort of a long and sad story. But generally, no. Considering the high risk area you're in, considering the number of men involved, and fatigue and everything else goes with it, generally it was pretty good.
Can you tell us what happened in the situation with the investigation you were involved in?
Yeah, there was an incident. I won't go into real specific details, but it was suggested one of the fellows shot himself, and there was I spent a number of trips up and down while they investigated the matter. He shot himself deliberately in the foot. It's a bit of a long story, and no names, no pack drill, but those things do happen, and that was about the only incident I know of where it was appeared to be deliberate. The rest of the time it just didn't happen. We had fellas refused to go out. They were generally taken aside and counselled. If you played up, you got slung in the barbed wire enclosure and driven down to the strip and shoved on a helicopter. So, as I said, when the army has a war and they invite you, they get very terse if you don't turn up.
When someone is pulled aside for counselling, what does that normally entail?
Depending on who does the counselling. If it's local counselling, you end up with a lot of bruises. If it goes to the administration part where it's got to be recorded, it's usually a matter of them going before a small board of inquiry, and your records being recorded that you committed a misdemeanour and unbecoming of your duties, etc., and that's recorded. There weren't too many of them, although we did get the articles of war read to us at one time because we were playing up a bit too much, and the boss decided that he'd had enough of us. And I can still remember it. Any more than a gathering of three constitutes a group towards mutiny, a meeting towards mutiny, which means you can be shot. Very clearly. Yes. So, yeah. So we all behaved ourselves for a few weeks thereafter that. So, boys are boys.
What had you been doing before that?
Oh, I think there was a bit of... I don't know what I should do about this part. We had a particular officer who wasn't exactly fitting in, and he was reminded of what could happen to him if he didn't fit in. And, the administration didn't take very kindly towards that type of thing. Having an effigy of him hanging outside his tent in a noose. But eventually they moved him. Probably the wisest move they ever made. He was moved to another area because he just couldn't fit in. It's as simple as that. We'd been there for some time, and he turned up, and he just couldn't get a grip of it, and fell out with everybody from God down to the last man type of thing. So they're the sort of things that they do happen. They're the sort of things the Australian Army tries to hide, but they happen. It's personalities, it's people, it's stress, there's many things. It's not a criticism, it's a reality.
Part of life.
Yeah, part of life. You would get that in big offices here in the city.
As you pointed out, accidents happen everywhere in every kind of industrial situation, but obviously a war zone is a very different situation. How is it handled at the time? Is there an investigation straight away, or is there not really as much time for that?
There's not enough time, but it certainly gets, it has to be documented. I mean, to say there's a fellow been shot. It's documented, and then they take statements generally from those involved, which can be coerced from you if you're unwilling to participate, and a decision is made and a penalty is handed down. It's just the same as if you go speeding down the road and get pinched by the police and getting a ticket, go to court and pay your fine. Same type of thing, except in a war zone, it's a lot of things are brushed aside. That can be minor things are let go, but discipline is extremely important in a forward base like that, and it's very important to maintain discipline. So there isn't too much tolerance of matters that would challenge security or command. They just are not tolerated, and they're dealt with fairly severely. Anywhere between being sent to jail or to having your pay stopped, which would be not a quite pleasant thing. I mean, to say you're risking your life there and you're doing it for nothing. So, they had their ways of ensuring your behaviour was appropriate.
Apart from the officer that we just spoke about, what was your regard generally for the officers?
Pretty good, yeah. When I say grew up together, we all came through together. We all came out of Australia together. So, and you had a lot of respect for them. They had a hell of a job to do. I have travelled far and wide talking with all the fellas through the companies, and I can't say there were too many that had problems. The platoon commanders were very well regarded because they lived with the men. They were right there where it happened, and those fellas had the responsibility of their team as well as their own self, and of course pleasing those who had sent them there to perform the duty. Today's society has lost a lot of personal responsibility, and today everybody wants to blame somebody else for their own shortcomings. There were no areas of blaming somebody else for your shortcomings. You weren't given that opportunity, which seems to be the norm today. You were responsible, you knew you were responsible, and you did it, and that's all there was about it. It's not anything that is hard to do, it's just that it has to be done. If you want to survive and you're part of it, you do it. There it is.
Nearly every vet we speak to doesn't consider themselves to be brave. It's just what you said, it was just you were there and things had to be done. But are there things that you saw that you consider to be brave?
Brave or stupid, I don't know which. There's a fine line of difference between them. The occasional thing, when the battalion was hit by at Coral, there were a lot of fellas did a lot of wonderful things. I wasn't there at the time, and I've heard of them. People don't get up and do things to be brave. People get up and do things because they've got to be done. That's just the way it is, and you don't go out of your way to commit brave acts. Circumstances are there, and you have to live with the circumstances, and that's what creates these acts of valour. And the men that do them, they very seldom know they've done them. Sam Breon, the medic there, he is a good example of it. He was in so much of it, and when they asked him did he recall the event that won him the military medal, he just said yes, because everything was just the same. It was just a job that he did, and he said he never thought anything more of it. He said he didn't like it, but he did it, and that's the best way of explaining it. You don't think about it, you just do it.
Are there things that happened that you saw that now you look back on and you think they were brave?
Yeah, everybody's looking for a hero. I think everybody that went there was a hero. You never considered, never really crossed my mind, no. No, all right, I'll say no, it's the easiest way out of that one. I'll avoid that one.
Okay, fair enough.
I believe everybody did their job and did it properly, and it's only occasionally that outstanding feats happen, and they usually happened in circumstances where you really aren't sitting there as a casual bystander to to see the event and perceive it as it is written later.
When you were talking earlier about, if you weren't frightened,
You're a fool.
you're either a fool or, you weren't there or you were lying.
Mm.
Does life, though, after being there for that amount of time and you're that dog-tired, does it ever become monotonous?
Yes, it can be not only monotonous, it can become numbing. And you can become robotic and do things and never consider that you've done them, and later on you go, oh hell, why did I do that type of thing? And you do that, you can do that from time to time, and that comes with tension, exhaustion and all those types of things. People do incredible things when they get into that state, into that physical and mental state, and that's when the exceptional things happen. And I think it could happen to anybody.
Like what sort of things?
Oh my God, here we go again. Moving forward under fire. Sam did it regularly and never thought anything of it. I've talked to him a lot about it, and getting somebody that's hurt moved, even though they're exposed to fire, this type of thing. It's hard to answer because they're an individual thing, and people try to analyse it and sterilise it. It's not. It just can't be. It just can't be put down into one little thing. It's a moment in time, and it happens, and it's only later that it's exposed to be what it is.
When you're out on patrol and you're being fired on.
I drove off the road one day when they shot at me. Scared the shit out of me. Boss wasn't real impressed too. We went straight down this frigging big drain. I never thought we were going to get out of it. I just thought, oh no. Anyway, we drove along the drain and eventually got back up the other end. Went like the bat. Sorry, what was the question?
It kind of answered it. I was going to ask what kind of reaction does go on.
What would you do if somebody shot at you?
I probably couldn't say without swearing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that was a hell of a day. That was a hell of a day. First reaction straight off the bloody road. Don't worry about how deep it is. Don't think about how the hell you're going to get out of it. Just get off the frigging road. And he said, if they don't get you, I will. I was too shit scared. I wasn't scared of him. I was scared of the bastards. Yeah. Yes, yeah, it certainly kept you alive. When I say alive, kept you aware, that's for sure. You laugh about it now, it wasn't funny at the time, but oh dear. What a bugger of a day that was. Yeah, every time I went past that rotten part again, oh shit, here we go again. Used to turn that Land Rover into a rocket every time I went through that area. Oh dear. What was your question?
You made me laugh so hard I'm crying. I was just asking what kind of reaction comes on when you're being fired at? Is it instant adrenaline, or is it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're like a spring. You're wound the whole time, and the spring snaps. That's the best way of explaining it. And you react. You don't think. You just react. You just react, and that's all there is about it. The night the ambush happened, we'd had a lot of noise, and how did it all happen here? I was, we were awake for a long time trying to work out what the hell was going on in front of us, and I eventually lay down on my back beside the machine gun and closed my eyes, and the next minute there's this almighty roar, and when I looked up, the M16 of the fellow beside me is there, about that far away, about a foot away, on full automatic, just hosing the area, and I was blinded and deafened by the noise, and I rolled over and let fly. And if there'd have been anything, helicopters flying around, I'd have got them, because it was just, I just couldn't see or hear, and I was pretty deaf for about a day, 2 days. About 2 days it took me to get over that. I was just deaf. That's all it was about. I couldn't hear a bloody thing. I had to sit in the tent for 2 days because I could not hear. And there were blood trails in the morning, and we don't know what it was. But it was somebody moving when they shouldn't have been moving. And you never think about it. You just never think about it. It's just one of those things. It's all part and parcel of another day. And how many more days have I got to go before I can go home? That's it.
A number of Vietnam vets have said that one of the things that made it so unusual there and so frustrating was that you often couldn't see what you were shooting at.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you move into the jungle, it's they can fire from a position and just duck down, and you can't see a bloody thing. It's very scary. It's very scary, and vice versa. They can't see you unless they're waiting for you in a particular area. The Americans would travel along tracks. If there was a defined track that everybody walked down, they would walk along it. This is the difference between Americans and Australians. The Australians would never walk on a track because that's obviously a place where an ambush would be. So it was quite common for our men to walk right up to something before the others knew they were there, and vice versa. The men could also walk right up to them while they knew you were there. So it's a two-edged sword. Camouflage is a two-edged sword. But yes, in those jungle areas, everything's the same, particularly after rain. Everything's wet and glistening, and your mind is just racing the whole time.
Were there other circumstances of contacts where you could clearly see them?
Yeah, a number of times I was shot at but could never find out where the hell it came from. You just go to the ground and fire back in the general area where it came from, but most of the time there wasn't anything there. There was hit and run stuff, and it wasn't until the battalion was involved in a couple of really big battles that they actually could see what the hell they were at. And they were usually at night time, those things. So again, it's just poke it in the right direction and hope it does some good. That's how it works. It's not as clinical as it's made out on television. It's just not that clinical.
What was your attitude or feeling towards the enemy?
I didn't go over there with a hate. I went over there with the belief that this is sort of diversing a little bit, but I went over there in the belief that we were doing some good, hopefully doing the right thing by the people. I wouldn't say I believed in what they were doing towards us, but you don't wind yourself up on hate. If you wound yourself up on hate, you would rot inside and you'd be no good to anyone. And that is an emotion that affects you here in Australia. If you have a partner who does the wrong thing by you and you leave the partner and you dwell on hate, it eats you from inside. So generally it's not something that you dwell on. It's not something you carry around consciously. It's in your subconscious. But it's not something you openly carry as a badge, because if you do, it drives you mad. So in answer to your question, it never really crossed my mind that much. It was, hopefully I get them before they got me. It was very clinical, I know, but that's the only answer you can give. You just can't carry hate. Nobody can. It doesn't matter whether it's a partnership breakup or whether it's a war zone. I mean to say, strange things come out of wars. You only got to talk to the old World War II fellas that captured Germans, fed them and gave them cigarettes. What the hell?
Did you ever see anyone that was carrying around hate?
Yeah, I actually see it sometimes today. There's some fellas that still got twisted ideas, and that's why I believe they should go back to Vietnam and go back and clear themselves of this, because they're no good to themselves and they're no good to anyone else. And you can only survive with that type of thing for a short time because it drives you mad. It kills you internally. It kills you from the inside out. So, yeah, everyone talks tough and everyone is full of bravado, particularly when you've had a few drinks. But I don't think the Australians went over there with a hate. They went over there with a job, but definitely not a hate. I mean to say, if that was the case, why do so many men return and do things for them? I travelled through North Vietnam. I still find the North Vietnamese are a strange bunch of people. They're still got it. You can still see the attitude of them up there today. Whereas the South Vietnamese, they're really beautiful people and very open and friendly. And the North Vietnamese are totally the reverse. They've got a chip on their shoulder. They're still communists. They still think the world owes them a living. They still think they're wrong done by. And they don't want to work. Whereas the South get off their bum and do everything. And they're there and it's all forgotten about. Let's get on with life.
You mentioned to us before about going into that bar and there was an American there that had been getting high. Were drugs ever a problem amongst the Australians?
Not in the Australians, because there wasn't enough connection between us and the Americans for the supply to spread. The fella that shot himself, that I was involved in the investigation of, we believe drugs were involved, but they had come from a unit of Americans that had been in touch with our group. And that is the only time I can ever suggest, and I'm only suggesting that was the case, that it was drugs involved. But again, we were an isolated group in an isolated province doing our job. We were responsible for the province, and we were a standalone army. So we didn't have that interaction, and therefore drugs was never a problem. Somebody could answer differently to that. I don't think so. It would stand out too quickly, and it would be dealt with severely. I can promise you that it would be dealt with severely, and there was not the opportunity. Even if you wanted it, the opportunity wasn't there.
Stand 2.
Stand 2, yeah. Yes, geez, yeah. Do we have to? I've been there too many times. Too many times.
Can you just explain to people what the deal
do you want to know? Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't teasing you.
It's a time in your life you dread the most, actually. Stand 2 is activated prior to first light. It is well known that the best time to attack people is at first light, because you are in a transient state of awakeness, and if you can strike at that particular time, you have the advantage. So to overcome the surprise attack, Stand 2 is called a half an hour before first light, and proceeds until I think 1 hour after full light, and then that way there can be no surprise. Everywhere you go in the army, whether it be on active service or training, you have Stand 2 to accustom you to it. And in that period of time, your eyes adjust to light. My eyes are very sensitive to light. I can see a lot of things in the dark that people can't see, and I believe it became, my eyes became accustomed to it through seeing so much of that type of thing. And the worst part is you get woken from a bloody dead sleep, and as I said, this is the best time if you're going to do something to anybody, is just before first light, because that's when they're at their greatest, they're the lowest ebb, and the time it takes for you to react in that period is slower than if you were to hit them, say, in full light. So that's what Stand 2 is.
And what about your morning routine?
Depending on who was on, they would light the boiler and boil the water so that everybody could have a hot drink, shave. After Stand 2, Stand 2 can be called at any time, by the way. An emergency, that's an emergency as well as a Stand 2. The day, actually, I tried to think about this when I first said you were coming, and it's It's really hard. Some things are strange that I can't recall them. The day would start off with if you weren't on stand 2. I think we always rose at first light. I still do today. I usually wake at 5:30. Wake up, clean up, breakfast, and then the day's normal work starts, be it whatever it is. If you're in the field, everybody stands to, of course, from the top down, because that's the most vulnerable time. And then it would be make a brew, have something to eat out of your rations, and prepare to move. You usually would shave in your coffee mug after you drank what you had, and shave with the rest, because you had to carry whatever you had to carry. There was nobody running along behind you with a wheelbarrow carrying the stuff for you. So you learned to go without a lot too when you went out.
How would you grab a feed when you're out on patrol?
Usually, the Australian Army has a unique ability to stop in the middle of a war for morning tea. We inherited this from the English. Stop the war, it's morning tea. And usually a break would be called and everybody would go into a harbour position, secured positions, and different ones would be allocated to stand to watch while the others brewed up, and then they would rotate through backwards and forwards. Then the normal day, depending on where you were talking about, whether you're talking base or outside, would be they would have an objective to achieve within that day, whether it be cover a certain distance, search a certain area. The day would proceed accordingly until the shit hit the fan, and from then on, 30 seconds of sheer exhilaration and back to 12 hours of sheer boredom. I think, does that answer your question?
Did you ever do sort of overnight patrols and that?
Yeah.
Would you ever get a hot box feed out in the bush?
Only on long operations that they would send them out, yeah. They would be cooked back at the base and flown out by helicopter in hot boxes, yeah. But there wasn't a lot of that. On the big operations out there, they would bring out showers. Yeah, this is the sort of stuff we prepared and sent out. Not too often did they get showers, it was nothing for them to go 3 weeks without a bath. That's why foot rot and skin rashes and irritations, and the medic would be the best one to describe the results of not bathing, particularly in the tropics.
So what would be a normal sort of, if you're just on hard rats and you have to stop for lunch, what would that entail?
Well, depending what rat pack you got. What was in the rat pack is what you got. It wasn't like you hang on, I'm going to snip down to McDonald's. There was no opportunity for that. And bear in mind, the rations are made on the basis of being enough nutrition to support you for the day. They're not making you fat. There is adequate nutrition in to sustain you till the next day. Emergency rations, which is like a chocolate bar. I don't know whether you ever saw one or not. You could only eat about three bars of it, 3 crosses of it. It just filled you up. These things are prepared in Malaysia, where they have people who are tested in all sorts of conditions, and they're not military; they're civilians. And when I was in Malaysia, I had time to speak with them, and if they were testing a particular type of ration pack, these people would live on it for 2 to 3 months, and then they would weigh them and do all types of medical tests, and make them work and run and do the things that were expected to see if that would sustain.
And when you met these people that made the ration packs, did you feel the urge to punch any of them in the head?
You can say that again. You do this for a living? You mean you do it willingly? I mean, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you?
Now, a lot of the blokes we've spoken to, particularly officers, always tell us that there wasn't a single person that went to Vietnam who didn't want to go.
I wish Doug McCallum was alive today, and he would give you a definite no to that answer. I can assure you of that. As I said, they shipped Doug up to Townsville because he was playing up and complaining so much. And just before we were ready to go, Doug got bundled onto a plane and landed there at Holsworthy, and somehow I saw him. I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And there he was. And he was drafted straight in to one of the companies, and later on he was moved to BHQ. So that is a complete fallacy. That is something they've made up in their own mind to justify that. No, that's crap.
Did you ever have to sign anything before you went to say that you had willingly?
I don't know whether you sign. See, as I've said before, when the army has a war and they invite you, they get pretty terse if you don't turn up. And so you were invited, and so there wasn't any need. There was an act of parliament that said you were going. And the army owned you for that period of time. And if the army said go, you went. And if you said no, then they found ways of making life very unpleasant until you did go. And so I don't agree with that at all.
Because they often back this up by saying there were blokes in the regular army in Australia that wanted to go to Vietnam and couldn't go.
There was fellas in the regular army that didn't want to go back for a second tour. We've done our time. Smokey Dawson, who was with me and was killed. Harry White. They didn't want to go back for a second tour, but they were professional, regular soldiers. The battalion was turned around and they went. They weren't the type to run away and become political bloody activists or that type of thing. They were professional soldiers. And that was the commitment. But willingly go? Were people forced to go? The army has a way of persuading you without really showing you that, how can I put it? It's sort of, they have a way of persuading you. Let's just leave it at that. They have a way of persuading you.
Did you ever meet any people that wanted to go that couldn't go?
Yeah, I've met people who've said that, but there were different, I don't know, they had different agendas, whether they had an exaggerated opinion of what was going on or not. I can't answer why they would be that way inclined. I think it was a duty that had to be performed, and that's all there is about it.
How did you receive your pay while you were there?
What pay? We received it in MP scrip. Scrip money was made, monopoly, I've never kept any unfortunately, it was monopoly money made by the Americans, and they changed it every 12 months to stop black marketing. And you would draw your pay in scrip by going to the paymaster or saying if payday came around, and I've got a pay book inside still. I don't know whether it's from a Vietnam pay book, but virtually they just doled it out and signed the form type of thing, and it was monopoly money, and it was MP. I can't remember the exact words they used for it. The MP script anyway, and every so often they would stop. They'd lock the camp down. Once we were there, they just locked the camp down. Nobody came in, nobody came out until it was all collected, and the new stuff was brought in and then if you had more than you should have had, you had to explain why you did have it. So that's what you used. You used scrip money, and that covered the Americans as well. It was American military money. If the Vietnamese ended up with it, when they did the changeover, of course, it was worthless. Totally worthless piece of paper. You might as well throw it to the wind because it was worth nothing. And the American dollar, as it is today, is still the most valued currency anywhere in the world. But that's how you got paid, and that's how you paid for your drinks at the boozer, and if you ever went near a PX or R&C, blah, blah, blah. I dare say the brothels and the clubs in various areas had some way of transcribing it to American dollars. I don't know that side of it, but I'm sure there would have been some type of arrangement to a certain extent to convert it. But the whole idea of military money is military payment is to stop the black marketing of goods. That's why they use military scrip.
Did you ever see any greenbacks floating around?
Oh yeah, you used to come across it. If the Vietnamese saw it, of course, that's the first thing they'd take and pay you back in peso, which was completely bloody worthless. But they were not allowed to be found in possession of military scrip. They were just forbidden to have it because it was an internal military payment form. But as I said, they just locked the country down, and the same day everybody handed it all in, and they replaced it with new monopoly money.
Did you have any of your money allotted anywhere?
No, mine just stayed in the paybook, and until I was ready to come home, it just stayed there.
What about the chaplains there? Did you see much of them?
Oh yeah, we had Father Tinkler. He was great. He really fitted in with the boys. There was a thing called Everyman's, which is a how can I put it? The Everyman's was a non-denominational church assistance group, and they provided a fellow there who had soft drinks and that type of thing, books to read and letters if you didn't have any paper to go and write a letter. The same as the Salvation Army would do. In the old days, the Salvation Army did it, and that's how the Salvation Army was formed, type of thing. And this was called the Everyman, so it covered all denominations, and I can't remember. There was one fellow, but from what religious denomination he came from, I honestly can't remember. But our general chaplain was a Catholic.
On top of that, Everyman's, was there Salvos as well?
No, the Everyman's was... It could be a Salvo, he could be a Methodist, he could be a Baptist, he could be Catholic, he could be anything. The church was virtually a missionary within the confines of it, but we had our own chaplain, and we still do to this day.
And did you go to any of the church services? Church parade?
In Vietnam? I don't think so. I think I was a heathen. I can't recall. I may have gone to a couple of funeral services, if you're available. See, it's not like you could sort of electively say, well, I think I might slip over to over the bar and have a couple of beers and then drop by the church type of thing. You're very seldom moved out of your allotted area. I would have moved more than anybody probably in the battalion. I was constantly travelling between various areas with the work that I did.
What sort of places would you take the boss?
Meetings, hospitals, if there was some type of security problem, he would go to that. If there was some type of supply problem, he could go to that. He would go to Vung Tau on numerous occasions for hospital visits. He would travel to a couple of different bases where they were trying to do a sort of a wheeling and dealing with the Yanks, but generally those types of things are, it's a very, very organised type of thing.
If he went to the hospitals, would you go in with him?
No, because I would not be wanting to be involved in what was being said. There is no point in me becoming involved in a thing like that. They were very contentious issues when he went to those types of things. I remember very clearly a trip we did down to Vung Tau, and I was somewhere, I don't know why we're down there, I don't think it was a hospital visit, and this little fella come along and he had a pair of shorts and an M16 in his hand. That's all he had, no hat, no shirt, no nothing. He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Wonnerup, mate." And he said, "Mate? Mate?" I said, "What's wrong with you?" "Mate? Mate?" And he was obviously an officer who felt aggrieved by the fact that I didn't call him sir, but he had no rank and I had no reason to call him. The boss appeared from somewhere, I don't know where he appeared. He had this ability to manifest himself out of smoke sometimes. And, "Raise your hat!" And chewed this bloke's ass, and he was gone. So I don't know what this fellow was. I never found out who this fellow was. It was just one of those things. But by his reaction, he must have considered that I owed him some sort of formality, but he never got it because that was just the way we were.
And that sort of formality that's more obvious, obviously, in a regimented sort of role in Australia, when you're in Vietnam active service, does that change?
It certainly does. Would you wear a bright shiny hat with badges on your shoulder? Not bloody likely. Yes. The fact that the officers were with us They wanted to blend in and be sort of just be seen as to be one of us, because otherwise they become a target, don't they? It was only the base grouped people who had this idea of, you know, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir stuff, you know. But when you're up where we are, no, there certainly was discipline and respect, but it was delivered in another way, but it was always there.
So if the boss had to go somewhere other than in a vehicle, like in a helo, would you go with him on those trips as well?
No, a number of times I'd take him to a plane and he'd disappear up into Saigon for some reason. That's how I come to photograph the helicopter that blew up. I delivered him somewhere and he was gone, and there was a gunship loading. And actually I've only met one fellow who remembers this particular incident. It happened at the refuelling station at the back of Nui Dat Hill. And I took a photograph of this gunship. It was Americans, and they spoke with me for a minute. And as I drove away, they ran past me. I thought, shit, that's funny, isn't it? And when I looked behind me, the bloody helicopter was on fire, and the next minute it exploded and rockets went every bloody way. I felt like getting out and running, because the Land Rover's not the fastest getaway car you can have. But these bloody Yanks come running past me, and I thought, what's wrong with them? I looked back, and about another 30 seconds later, and what had happened, the refuel had spilt avgas, and avgas is very volatile and it can burn without you actually seeing it, and the heat from the motor has ignited it and went into the fuel tank. Up she went. And I eventually ran into I used to, sometimes the mind plays tricks, and I thought, I've made this up. Anyway, I ran into a fellow called Kevin Agenbar at a heart safe program a couple of years ago, and I said to Kevin, you were stationed over near the helipad, weren't you? He said, yeah. I said, do you ever remember this event happening? Because by this stage, I'm starting to think I've made it. He said, yeah. He said, did you see it? I said, see it? I bloody near got my head knocked off by it. The biggest piece left was the tail rotor. She just went whoomp. The whole bloody lot. All the rockets went off. The fuel went off. The machine gun ammunition went off. Yes, I did take him down. I was always quick to drop him off and drive off after those sort of events.
And the camera you had, was that a legal camera, or?
Yeah, I had a Yashica. I must have bought it here in Australia. Just a Yashica 35mm. I was probably the only one in the whole place that had a camera, in my group that had a camera. Cameras were very rare. Cameras were, in our battalion, never carried in the bush. I found later that the other battalions did allow men to carry, which was most contrary to normal protocol of bush work, carrying anything that identifies you other than your dog tags. Very unusual.
What was the relationship like that you had with the boss?
Great, he was a really great fellow. Yeah, really great fellow. Unfortunately, he died just after we returned to Australia, so it was quite tragic. His name was Paddy Brennan. He was the RSM of SAS for many years. And very well known and very well respected right throughout the entire Australian military. When he became very ill towards the end of the tour, he was replaced by another equally decent fellow called Ted Cannon. And these fellows had been in Korea and in the Australian Army, and they were professional soldiers and gentlemen at the same time.
What about correspondence? Were you writing home to your girlfriend?
Yes, I wrote too many letters. I finished up marrying her. Mail came in on a regular basis, was sorted by the postman and thrown onto the helicopter and flown out to the men in the field. I sort of wrote every now and again. I got into trouble because I didn't write home. I couldn't be bothered writing home. I wrote to Judy, that's all I did. So I got in a strife about that, told her to write a letter home. I received, come in here and stand to attention, I want to talk to you. Oh, yeah, what have I done this time? My grandmother died while I was there, and the family had written, they wrote to the administration, and the administration had formally advised me that my grandmother had died. It was just one of the things. It was a bit unfortunate, but that's the way it went. And generally, mail was pretty well on time. They did have a big strike here during the time we were away in 1968. The Australian sorters went in revolt of pays or some sort of dispute. I don't know. We were over there, and they used to have stickers of punch a postie on RTA to make sure they sorted the mail and sent it through. So it's probably one of the little industrial disputes that got buried very quickly, but it did happen. It did affect us for a while. But although they were on strike here in Australia, they did process the Vietnam mail. I believe that's to be true.
Did you blokes get comfort funds or anything like that? Care packages?
No. No, definitely not. There was SP ration packs, which was a supplementary pack, what they call an SP pack, supplementary pack, and that had cigarettes in it, and none of them would smoke menthol, so I got all the menthol cigarettes out. I thought that was a pretty good deal. Nearly died when I had to buy my own. But no, there was nothing like that.
Had you smoked before joining the army?
Oh, as a kid we used to pick dumpers up out of the street and smoke them. But big time, no, not really. I've had the odd suck or two, but generally it wasn't something that I was interested in. But it was a part of the culture. Drinking and cigarettes were part of the Australian culture. There were 4 cigarettes in a little pack in the ration pack. They were Pall Mall, Winston, Salem, Camel and Chesterfield. I should have kept the packet of them. They were 4 in a packet, a little thin packet, and they actually came in the American ration packs. Not the Australian packs, in the American packs. And so cigarettes and booze and no women. 3 out of 2 wasn't bad.
And were you counting down the days to going home?
Everybody does. Yeah, everybody really looks and becomes very anxious and very nervous that you could get killed before you get there. Yeah, that's. I'm sure everybody used to have the same thing that we had. It was sort of 14 days in a wakey. You never count the last day because that meant 15, so you always called it a wakey, because you weren't going to be there if you were gone that morning. And then the day we left, they landed a C-130 with oil leaking out of the bloody motors on the runway, and we went on. It was just a deck, just a flat deck, cargo deck. They got big long cargo straps, and we sat down probably about 15 abreast. They ran the cargo strap across our lap, and you sat on the floor with your knees hooked up, came across your groin, and they pulled it up tight like cargo, turned around and took off. We didn't care so long as we were going up. That's how we came out of Nui Dat, the advance party, back to Australia to prepare to go to Malaysia, because by that time I'd signed on for another 2 years.
What was the feeling when you took off in the C-130 at Nui Dat?
Bloody great. What else would it be? Thank God I'm out of here alive.
But it was from there to Saigon first?
From there to Saigon, the 200-yard dash across the tarmac onto a Qantas, and we just got off the ground in Saigon due to the amount of weight and fuel that we had on board, because it was a continuous non-stop flight. And I arrived back here early Friday morning. It was an 8-hour flight, so we left. I know we left about midday Nui Dat. Midday, mid-afternoon, and then there was about 8 hours flying time. So it would put us back. I know it was dark when we landed in Australia, about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that.
And a lot of blokes are bitter about being brought back in what they feel was in the dark to try to sneak them in. Did you get that?
No, that's nonsense. They weren't brought back in the dark. It was just, as I said earlier, that damn airport had so much traffic. I don't believe that was the case. The fact is, the jet would have been on the ground ready to return us early in the day. It's the ability to get us off the ground from where we are. It's not like, well, shit, your time's over, boys, you can go home. Here's a bus ticket. You really have to still wait for the availability of aircraft. You just don't get in and drive up bloody Saigon, because things were still really hopping. And no, I don't believe that. I think there's been a serious misinterpretation of that. I've heard that before, and it's puzzled me why it's being said, but that's nonsense. That's nonsense.
How was it getting ready at Nui Dat, sort of a day to go and you're packing up your gear?
It turned into a 48-hour day. You wake up in the morning and it took forever and forever and forever. And then there was always the military hurry up and wait. So you got down to the bloody runway and you sat there in the sun for about 3 hours, and eventually this yank turns up with his cowboy hat and bloody boots and his C-130 leaking oil out of the motor. We didn't care so long as the damn thing flew. And got out and poked it with a stick, and more oil fell out of the cowling of the motor, and I thought, oh shit, so long as it can make Saigon, who cares? But it was just, I think it was just delay of aircraft. There are other priorities. There's a war going on. I mean, to say they're not real worried about sending you home, are they? So this business arriving back in the dark, it just happened that way. I don't believe that was done deliberately. I don't believe that at all. Bear in mind, Australia has air curfews too, and we came in during the air curfew, so that flies in the face of that comment. Australia has curfews on night flying, and I don't know whether a lot of people know this, but those curfews would have been broken by our flight coming in at that time. There's all sorts of political reasons, noise pollutions, No, I think that was just the way it worked out, and the delay was at our end. Not, I mean, if you're a Qantas pilot, would you want to be sitting on Saigon runway? I don't think so. And all flights are scheduled. It's not like, you can go home now. They have to fit into schedules. They have to fit into flying times. They have to fit into refuelling stops. They have to fit in with, they would have brought a load up that day and done a turnaround and gone back out again because they don't like staying on the ground too long. So they would have arrived, when did we arrive? Late morning. And we got up there late afternoon to come home. So, yeah.
Was it a civvy cabin crew on the Qantas?
Yeah, they were great. Yeah, they were. We landed in Sydney, and they walked down the plane with a spray and sprayed the air conditioning. And the chief steward said, "Gentlemen, Count Malaria is now dead." In other words, they killed the insects because we'd left the malaria zone. And that's what they used to do. They used to fumigate the plane with a spray can, send it through the air conditioning to make sure it got so bugs didn't get out the door when they opened the door. Yeah, Count Malaria is now dead.
And did you get a few drinks on the way home?
Yeah. Bearing in mind that your system was fairly purged of all alcohol because of the climate, so it didn't take too many drinks to make you giggly and have a sleep on the way home. You knew you were going home. And so long as you can walk away from the landing, it's a good landing.
And in those few weeks when you're in Vietnam, when you start to think about going home, you're also getting to the end of your national service contract. What were you starting to think about, what you might like to do after the army?
I had two old fellas get hold of me one day and they said, "Listen, we're going to Malaysia and Singapore, and this is a good thing for you to do and you should stop and seriously think about it," because they knew I'd signed on earlier. And I wrote to Judy and discussed it with her, and I said, we can be married and go from there to Malaysia and then down to Singapore. A, would you like to marry me? And B, would you like to go overseas? And she said yes. And I said, I signed on the dotted line for another 2 years, which made me still a national serviceman. I was a national serviceman for 4 years, and I did 3 years overseas service.
Did you do this, you signed all this in Vietnam?
In Vietnam, yeah.
And you proposed to her in a letter?
In a letter. I don't know where the letter is. Should have burned it. It's evidence. I could have got rid of that.
And you knew at that time that you could take families with you?
Yes. Yes. Various people had been on service in Malaysia, and it was a great. We had AMAs, which are house servants, and accommodation provided, and it was quite an incredible experience. That's why I didn't get to see. I was only home 1 week. I landed Friday night, I took off Saturday morning, the following Saturday morning. That's the only time I saw Brisbane.
Can we just fill in that gap? What was it like getting home?
It was great. There was just so much happening because, there was a wedding being prepared, and I'm merely a decoration at the wedding. I mean to say, I've had no part in this wedding. I'm merely the decoration there, and I had to get hold of Robert Stack, my best man, Bob Stack, and we had to go and get drunk together. Obviously, you can't get married without getting drunk, and my brother, the family gradually came to see me at home, and I didn't realise it, but my language was rather coarse for my mother, and my manner of alcohol consumption was rather offending, and to us it was just a natural way of life. And I used a very bad word in front of my mother-in-law, my wife. When somebody said to me, "What do you think of Vietnam?" and I told them, and very quickly people sort of faded away from around me. I didn't realise, because there were no women. We never saw women. So you had no reason to change your vocabulary, where you would adjust your vocabulary for the presence of women. Being so long without actually being in contact with a female, you certainly became rather coarse in your vocabulary. And when my stepbrother asked me, it was not stepbrother, it was sort of a semi-adopted brother who lived with us, asked me what I thought of Vietnam, and I replied and used a 4-letter word starting with C. And I thought I'd just answered his question adequately, but I noticed people, they were gone. So there were a number of things. Streetlights. I dragged Judy across the street one day in front of all the traffic. I wasn't aware of streetlights. I just wasn't aware of them. There was no streetlights. We drove on the left-hand side of the road. I can remember driving Kessel's Road the wrong way, on the wrong side one time. Not drunk, dead cold sober. It was just, it's a normal right-hand drive vehicle and you drive on the other side of the road. And I had all of these things to adjust to. And men who would have come home and gone from that straight into the civilian street, there was no debriefing, there was no assistance to blend within society. They just virtually, like I did when I came back from Malaysia, they just said, "Yeah, you're due for disembark, be back here on Friday the 25th to sign the papers, don't let me see you again." That was it. That's how you got out of the army. That's how I got out of the army after 4 years. Went to Inogra, handed my papers in, they said, "Yeah, come back on the 25th, we don't want to see you between now and then." Went back there, signed the papers, got on the bus, came home type of thing. The car, the bus, whatever it was.
A lot of blokes feel that they were brought home too quick.
Oh, geez, how can you pacify some people? I believe what they're trying to say is that they were not giving any form of debriefing or assimilation. And I think the government's well and truly at fault in that regards, because a lot of men brought home a lot of things that should have been dealt with before they were civilianised. Trauma cases particularly.
And the other interesting thing you brought up was that, you not only have that sort of drinking and smoking culture in the army, there's that definite swearing culture in the army.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. It wasn't designed that way. It's just that's the way it was. Men in those sort of situations swore. Nobody really considered it a problem. If things are going bad and you can't swear, then how do you relieve the situation, type of thing? And it's a way of relieving tension. I know it may sound crude, but it does work. If you can have a damn good swear, sometimes you can get over it, and it helps to relieve the tension. Some people would say, "Well, that's not right." Well, there's a lot of difference between right and alive too.
And there's worse ways you can...
And there's damn sight worse ways for it to come out later on. If it doesn't manifest itself now, it comes out in much worse scenarios later.
How hard did you find it then, trying to sort of put a lid on that sort of...
Ask my wife. It took a very long time, because we went to... remember, I only was back in Australia 3 weeks and gone again. And she had still had stars in her eyes and all that type of thing, and thought I could do no wrong. And it took her a while to wake up that, my goodness, this is going to be the way it is. And eventually you curtail it. You find that you've got to come back down to earth. But I went straight back up to Asia and straight back into that culture. And it would have... taken me a long. I used to drink heavily. She never knew me. Well, she knew that I'd drink, but she'd never seen me drunk, and then to fall through the door and sleep on the floor type of thing. It's not very impressive to a wife who's newly married, living in a foreign country. So I think she suffered a bigger culture shock as I did, but eventually it passed away, and you sort of came back to the reality of it. You become very hard and cynical. Me cynical? Of course not. But it takes a long time to wind down from those types of things, and some people never do. So I've been in houses where the men's homes are shrines to Vietnam, and I could never see the need for that. Life has to go on, and there were too many other things. I was 20, coming up to 22 years of age, and I had a wife and a future and all that type of thing. So you say, all right, well, now, things have got to change, and in me they've got to change. And so you make those things happen.
Being that you volunteered for National Service, was there ever a time when you were there in the thick of things and regretted that decision?
Yes. Every time I got bloody scared. Why did I do that? And seeing how I've made the commitment, I now have to see it through. So, after the sand had hit the fan and everything had cooled down and sort of disappeared again. But yeah, there definitely were a few times there. I wish I hadn't have done it. But is it the end justifies the means?
Was there anyone else with you that was a Nasho that signed on for a longer...
Oh, yes, definitely. The fellow I spoke of, John Goodwin, who lives in Newcastle, he did. There was a number of us, actually. John was the one who disappeared into New Guinea to be hidden from the call-up. And he signed on. There was myself and John. I can't remember anybody else, but there would have been a couple more somewhere around the traps. A few of the boys from Charlie Company. Yeah, there would have been a few. Yeah, it wasn't that. I wasn't rare. It wasn't a rare event.
Signing on again, could they have turned around and sent you back to Vietnam?
Yes, definitely. Because once you sign on the dotted line, you belong to them. But my commitment was already made to go to Malaysia and Singapore, so I didn't have that fear.
Was it ever a concern though that they might pull you out of?
No, because the battalion was programmed to go home, replenish, and return to Malaysia. That was the duty that they were given. So that was fixed in stone unless something happened, and the stone could be broken, of course. But generally, no, the answer is no. There was no fear of going back again. There were men who wanted to go back. There are people who would gladly go back, yeah. That's just the way they are.
What would you say would have been the main impetus for you to sign on again?
The fact of serving overseas, which I love travel, as I've said before, this time not being shot at, that was a big incentive. Financially it was beneficial. This is how we bought the house, saved the money and bought the house. The fact that it gave Judy and I 2 years away from the family, which is a very good thing for a young couple to be married, and it pushes you together or you break apart. And it makes or breaks a marriage. Fortunately for us it made. And generally just thought of being away. I wasn't overwrapped in the idea of playing soldiers again, but every job's got its down moments, hasn't it?
In that, I know you said you were only home for 3 or 4 weeks before you went back, but what was the attitude to the Vietnam War at home at that time?
When you're in a military camp, you're fairly isolated, but I don't recall the protests being that big or violent. I think it came later. I think it came more when I was away, and then I was away for 2 years, so I really saw very little of it. I felt the reaction of it, but I didn't physically see too much of it. You know, it was on the news and that type of thing, but when you live up in Malaysia and Singapore in those days, the country you live in supplies the news, and it's very difficult to get too much influence from home because you are in a foreign country. You are a foreigner in another country.
And what sort of duties were you doing in those 2 years up there?
Almost identical to what I did over there. I used to drive a lot from Malacca to Singapore, drive around Singapore, deliveries, pickups, almost a delivery boy, you could say. We were called out during the Malaysian emergency when they had difficulties controlling the problems up there, and we patrolled the streets through the particular areas we were. We travelled up some of the most remotest areas of the east coast of Malaysia to a place called Kuala Terengganu, which is way up on the Thai border. Absolutely incredible place to see. I was fortunate enough to see the Sakai, who are the Aborigines of Malaysia, the true Aborigines of Malaysia. The interpreter I had with me on this particular occasion was a little Chinese fellow, and he became very excited. There were village people with bundles and kids and dogs walking along the side of the road. They were on the right-hand side of the road. And he was so excited I couldn't understand what he was going on about. And later on we got about another mile up the road from these big large group of women. And there were the men in their arse grass and bows and arrows. And they had come down from the hills to trade. And they were going into this particular village somewhere along the line there. The men would go in and do the bartering. They would then get up and leave. The women and children would come in and exchange the goods. They were never seen together in public. Men were never seen to be with the women in public. And it is extremely rare to see those people. So I've had the good fortune to see. It took me a while to tie the bloody interpreter down and get him to speak slow enough for me to understand what the hell it was all about. But it was incredible. Incredible. I saw a village up there that left, just packed up holus bolus, because where the exercise was going through, they were throwing training equipment which sounded like explosives and machine guns, and the villagers in that area thought the war had started again, and they just packed up dogs, chooks, kids, anything they could carry, and they left. I had to go away with the interpreter and find what they call a ranger, who came back. He then explained that it was merely an army exercise and these things happened during the training of army. Showed them the types of explosives that they were letting off, that they were simulated. Discussed with them at length, that there was no problem, but they still stayed for about 2 days in this particular small area, and eventually they returned. And I took the ranger back into the camp there a couple of times to make sure everything had settled down. So it was a unique experience, really unique.
At the time that you were called out with the Malayan emergency, when that came about, was the thought in your head of, oh, here we go again?
It was a different type of situation. It was more civil unrest, not directed towards us. It was purely ethnic problems within Malaysia at the time. So we didn't consider that it was a problem. The Malaysian army were misbehaving because there was a curfew and they would set fire to houses. Houses would suddenly catch alight, and then the people who tried to get away from the fire were breaking the curfew and attacked by the army. So that's why the army was put away and we were brought out. But no, it didn't cross my mind that it would be another conflict. It was something that was purely within the confines of that country. It didn't affect the world at all.
But at the time that you were up there patrolling the streets, was there ever a time that you felt you were in the line of fire again?
No, because there wasn't the military might that was in Vietnam. There weren't the problems. The problems was, as I said, an ethnic problem, not a war problem. It wasn't a military problem.
So at the end of that 2 years, were you excited or reluctant to come back to Australia?
They said to me, here's the paper, sign on. And I said, where am I going? They said, Australia. I said, oh, no thanks. Yes, I'm going to Australia, but not in the army. If they'd have given me another overseas posting, I'd have signed on again. The army out of Australia is nothing like the army inside of Australia. It's totally different. It's as different as chalk and cheese. Supply, command, everything changes to a more realistic footing. And you're not playing, and I'm not downgrading the Australian Army by any means, but active service is so much different to training in Australia.
Stop for a second. So coming back to Australia, what happened?
Arrived back in Australia, the usual euphoria of returning. Then it was time to get on with life, finding a job, doing the things that other national servicemen would have done when they left the army. I still held national service rights, so I was immediately employable by the previous company who I had been with. Although at that time I was living in Sydney, they found me a position here in Brisbane. I got on with buying this house and this land and building the house because we had the money to do that with, and proceeded with a normal life that civilian people live with.
Did we still have troops in Vietnam at that stage?
Oh yes, yeah, they went till 73. Yeah, I think it was 73 was the last ones out.
You mentioned to us off camera before that the house you built, you got a war service loan.
Yes.
Can you explain how they worked?
Any person who served the military in an overseas posting was granted the sum, which is ridiculous in these days, but in those days it was a lot of money, of $8,000 at 3.25%, and that was the loan to be paid back. I think we paid $35 a month. That was to pay the loan off. This area is known as the War Service area. This block of land was, this portion of the suburb was an American air base during the Second World War. The men were housed here in tents, the pilots and the air crews and so forth, and they flew out of Archerfield Aerodrome in their bombers up to New Guinea to bomb the Japanese. So this land was held in reserve and opened in 1967, I think it was. No, it had just opened up when when I came back in 69. So it was probably coming onto the market in early 68. There were 3 blocks of land left in the suburb. I was fortunate enough to choose and buy this. I had to build a house of a certain value. I had to do it within 18 months of signing the documents to accept the title to the land. I have the original document there, which is the Torrens title, which is now it has no legal binding, it's just an historical document, and our names are on it, showing 1971 when we took possession of the land, built the house, and from there on, here we are. And 2 children who are grown into adults, and life goes on.
So the war service loan, the £8,000?
$8,000.
$8,000. What would the house have cost?
The house and the house and land cost just under $15,000. Today it's around about $440,000. I couldn't afford to buy it today if I had to. The block of land was $1,300, and the balance was the house. But bear in mind, at that time, the average wage was about 40 Australian dollars a week. So $8,000 and $40,000 really works out to be a lot of money at that time.
And when you said the $8,000, you got it at 3.25%.
3.25%.
What would the normal interest rate have been back then? Do you remember?
I wouldn't have a clue. Wouldn't have the faintest idea.
It was a discounted.
It was,
rate then?
yeah. It's a thing that's discounted for a returning serviceman. You could have a block of land here, or you could go and buy a block of land and put the money towards that. But I chose, because I came from this area originally, I chose a block of land here. It just flowed normally that I'd choose this land.
So being a war service area, were most of the neighbours at that time?
Everybody. Everybody was. The original settlers of this area had to be returned servicemen, Army, Navy, Air Force, and there's only a few of us left. We've been here 35 years, I think it is. Correction, 32 years, and there's a few of us left, originals.
A number of people that we've spoken to talk about how difficult it was to settle back into regular civilian life.
Oh yes.
Would that have made it easier though, do you think, being in a war service area?
Not really, because these people had moved on. I was the last one here, and they'd moved on. I'm a rarity being a Vietnam veteran. They were mostly elderly people. This entire street was elderly people. A lot of them have died or moved away. And there are only a few of us who are Vietnam veterans, Kevin down the back and a few of the boys across the back who have now moved away, of course. They being originals, there was a very small nucleus of us who were Vietnam veterans. So being in the area was really no help. I can remember the first week back at work, came Wednesday afternoon, I got up and started to leave, and the boss said, "Where are you going?" I said, "It's Wednesday afternoon, we go to sport on a Wednesday afternoon." It was just a natural reaction.
What other difficulties did you encounter settling in again?
Putting up with the attitude of civilians who really didn't appreciate what they had here in Australia.
How did that manifest?
Always complaining about what they've got and what they could have and so forth. And I'd just seen 3 years of countries that could barely feed themselves, and they just didn't realise how lucky they were. And a lot of people in Australia today still don't realise how lucky they are. And even though I've travelled a lot, I still appreciate the fact that Australia is probably one of the best countries in the world, if not the, it would be the best in my opinion. I'm prejudiced, of course. But there are many things that we take for granted. Women's rights, for instance. There are so many countries in the world today that women have no rights. And to see people complaining about, I can't get this or I can't get that or I can't get a handout. And I've seen people living on absolutely nothing, living in houses made of tin cans in Vietnam. They took the beer cans, flattened them out, stitched them together to make walls for their house. And they were clean and proud and happy. And then to come back and see the average attitude of Australians towards the government and towards Australia in general, it was pretty disconcerting. And you have to bear in mind they haven't had the experiences that I've had. And I had to be fairly tolerant and find a silent tongue on many occasions to not be vocal about those types of things.
Was that challenging?
It was very challenging. It still is today. I can sometimes speak my mind, and I get quite annoyed with people who just want to complain and find reasons to complain instead of getting up and helping themselves.
I kind of interrupted you there. What other difficulties did you encounter or challenges?
Work attitudes, particularly work attitudes, where people really didn't have the commitment to work that we'd had. The anti-war, or anti-war, but indirectly anti-Australian soldiers' sentiments. I had to be very careful how I behaved with that type of thing.
How did that rear its head?
In the RSLs, the older fellas considered that, quote, it wasn't a declared war, so you haven't been to a war. And there was a few of them that come very close to being disfigured by that comment.
I was going to say, I mean, when you come back and civilians are saying something to you, would be entirely different than other ex-servicemen saying things to you, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you be expecting them, of all people, to understand?
You would think so, wouldn't you? But it didn't happen that way. There were a group of old stodgies at the local RSL, and eventually I just didn't go to the RSL at all, because they had this attitude of it wasn't a war, and we were in the war and you weren't. Not all of them, but it certainly came out from some of them, and it came very close to them being physically injured, I can assure you. That's why I stopped going there.
How disheartening is that when you've lost, like you were saying to us, you lost nearly everyone that was in your original group that went over, to have men say things like that to you?
It's very hard to explain a thing like that. It makes me very angry. Even today, it makes me very angry. You know, sanctimonious bastards as far as I'm concerned. It's the only way I can explain it.
So coming back and running into attitudes like that and the other ones that you just discussed with us, was it things like that, do you think, that propelled you into a more regimented lifestyle like the police force?
I dare say. I always wanted to be in the police and never found time for it. But I certainly had leanings towards that quasi-regimentation, semi-military attitude, and expected to find more people of my leaning towards attitude in society within the police, and I did find it. It was a big help.
At the time that you were considering going into the police force, did you ever consider going back to the army?
No, they ran out of places to send me, and besides that, I'd promised Judy that we would make a home, so I had that commitment to my family. And the army, as much as it was a great time, you couldn't compare 3 years of overseas service to the military in Australia. It's just so different. It would be a bit hard to swallow. For me it was, and it was time to move on, and I chose the police.
Did you, when you initially got back, did you stay in touch with your mates from Vietnam?
Yeah, most of them were sort of scattered to the wind because our battalion was a southern battalion, so most of the boys were down south. I and a few others are sort of the odd ones out there up here, came from Queensland because the men were made up from right across the length and breadth of Australia, but the majority came from the southern states, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales. But yeah, I've kept in touch. Today when the phone rang and you first turned up, there was a friend of mine, Barry. He lives out towards Nanango now, and so we still get together from time to time. We used to have sandbag parties, which was a reunion, and all the boys would come from all over Australia and meet out at Barry's place, and we'd all sit there and laugh and tell lies and get drunk and fall over. And a sandbag party was a work party in Vietnam that you got sent on a sandbag party, which was loading sandbags, filling and loading sandbags either onto a truck or into a bunker or something like that in the hot sun. And so of course we always called it a sandbag party, but we were too old to fill sandbags, so we drank. Yeah, they were great parties, and we had them for a number of years, and the different ones faded away and died, and life turns. Life's a never-changing thing, and you must be prepared to move with it.
Some of the men that we've spoken to across all of the conflicts have spoken about when they've survived things that their mates didn't.
Yes, there is a guilt complex, yes. Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Oh, it's a bit hard. It upsets me. Why am I here and so healthy and there's so many dead or injured? This is a reaction. I see the psychiatrist and speak with him on these types of things, and it's a normal human function, as it's not only with military but with all members of society. A husband and wife in a serious accident, one of them is killed, the partner feels grieved that they didn't die as well, and it's very hard to come to terms with. You feel like you haven't done enough. I think a lot of men suffer from that. I do. I know that. I suffer from it from time to time. But you've got to realise that that's what God chose, and that's the way it was directed. And if that's what He's chosen, that's what He's said is going to be it, then that's the way it is. And you just have to make yourself aware of it. Otherwise, you're not going to be any good to yourself or anybody else. But it does affect you, and I think every man feels that. Every man that's been in Vietnam would feel that. I could have done more. I should have done more. You question yourself from time to time, and within yourself. Sometimes you take yourself out and beat yourself. There's no need for that, because it's just a human emotion.
And thoughts like that, are they strong when you first get back, or is it something that develops more?
It develops later in later years. Yeah, develops in later years. First of all, you're so glad to be home, and there's so much to be done in getting your life back on track again, fitting back into society, becoming part of society. There's just so much to be done, and it's only later, as you get older, you start to reflect upon these things, and that's when it strikes you the most.
And how does it affect you?
I used to feel guilty, quite guilty about it, and I used to question myself and why and how and these types of things, and then I found that why and how don't matter. That's just the way it was, and as I said, God has a path that we all travel down. He's selected it, and there it be.
What are your thoughts on PTSD?
I don't know what it's like. I suffer from the rotten thing. It can come out in so many and varied ways. It could it be avoided? I don't know. My father-in-law, who's in the nursing home, RSL nursing home, he suffers from it. They came home heroes. We came home villains. There's a big difference, isn't there? Society welcomed them home. We were criticised, and all of this plays a part in hiding yourself for many years. I hid myself, and this here is why I'm doing it now, to show that I'm prepared to stand up and say what we did was right at the time, and I believed in what we did, and the sacrifice was in some people's minds unjustified, but we were asked to do a job, and we got up and we did it. And I don't feel that society has a right to criticise us. So PTSD comes into play with you punishing yourself for other people's attitudes or other people's beliefs, and you have a bad habit of taking them on and trying to justify to yourself, and then as you get older, your body starts to weaken and you can't resist these types of things, and PTSD takes over from there. And it manifests itself usually towards the 50-year-old mark, as the body reaches a certain age bracket. 45 is sort of the quoted period, and most men seem to start to fall down after that. And it's just, you can't cope with the stresses you've been through anymore. Is it part of the chemicals we were given? Is it the life that we led? Are we weak in character? You know, there's just so many emotions and so many questions you can ask yourself, but you can't beat yourself. You can't take yourself out and beat yourself. I used to. I stopped doing it now. I stopped doing it, but PTSD is a very real thing. Some people don't believe in it. My nerves are completely shot. I have extreme problems with noise, even though I go to a gun range. It's strange, isn't it? I had the occasion to shoot in an event with rifles a few months ago. I had the worst group of nightmares, which I haven't had for a long time, with the rifle fire and the noise and the calling out of targets and that type of thing. And that night I was in sheer horrors. Most of it stopped after I came back from Vietnam. It took a while, but Vietnam in '99 and then again in 2000 stopped the dreaming, the mad, the insane dreams that you come up with. Situations you've never been in, and that put a closure to a lot of it. It stopped a lot of it. But I don't sleep in of a morning, because that's when the dream period starts. It usually starts around about the 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock mark. So I get out of bed at 5:30 and I avoid those types of nightmares, and that's how my life cycle's based. But I'm very tired. Emotionally, it wears out. It wears you down. And so you find things, and you get up and stop feeling sorry for yourself. You get up and you get off your ass and you do something. And that's the best therapy you can get, getting up and doing something.
Some of the Vietnam guys that we speak to from being diagnosed with PTSD and seeing their mates suffer from it.
Yeah.
Now, say they look back at the older generation, at their fathers and relatives, and recognise that they have it,
Yes.
but that the older generation...
They do have it. As I said, my father-in-law has it. It's my wife first pointed it out to me. His behaviour is exactly the same as mine.
Is he aware of it?
No, he's now starting to go into dementia. So, when you first come back, you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof, as the saying goes, and you've got too much living to do, and there's no time for this. There's no time. There's no time to be sick. There just isn't time. You've got too much to catch up on. You've got too much to do. You've got a family to raise and support, and houses to build, and a life to lead. So get up and get on with it. And later on, the body slows down and can't cope with the burden you carry. That's all there is about it.
I know you said that you, in sort of recent years, have sought psychiatric help with it.
Mm-hmm.
Before that professional circumstance arose, had you discussed your Vietnam experiences with anyone?
Never spoke to anyone. The only time I ever spoke to anyone was with the fellows I was with, and then we'd all get drunk and laugh. It was like old times. But my wife can tell you now, she wouldn't know the first thing about it. There's very few mementos even in this house today that would even suggest there's my Australian flag, and there is a statement from the government thanking me for my service. And I think that's the only items of display that I have. It was the fact that the era of protests and belittlement, downgrading, whatever word you want to use, towards us returned servicemen, that caused you to put it in the closet. If that hadn't happened, I dare say that there would be less psychiatric problems here today. At the same time, I've said to you before on tape here, there are men who dwell on it and make a living out of it. I don't feel that's right. I think it was a time in your life, like other people have times in their lives, where things happened, whether they were beyond your controls, irrelevant. You have to live and deal with it and move on. Because if you don't, the world will move on without you. And you will sit there crying in your own eyes. What is it? Laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. It's a very good motto.
When you do see your mates from Vietnam, do you discuss the bad times in Vietnam, or...?
No. We talk about all the times we got into trouble, or talk about all the things we got up to, or the mind only brings back bad events when you're tired or ill or that type of thing. PTSD has a bad habit of bringing it back more than it needs to be brought back. But we're here to live. We're not here to be morbid. Every now and again, one of the boys will come out with something that happened and different. That didn't. Bullshit, Barry. That didn't happen. So and so and so and so. It'd be a similar line, but they saw it from a different angle. And so then there'd be a sort of a half-baked argument about that, and everybody would agree, well, it did happen anyway, but who was telling the truth? Both sides were there at the same time. But those occasions are rare. We've had 30 years of life to put in between all of this. And even when we're in Vietnam, we didn't dwell on the misery. We found the best things in life, and that's how you survive. You get on with the best things in life. The mind suppresses and represses bad events for everybody, and they only manifest themselves at certain times. But you don't go around pricking the conscience deliberately to feel sorry for yourself or to dwell on it. Even on Anzac days, and I never used to go to Anzac Day. Never went. It was only in later years that I started going. And even then, the fellas don't talk about what happened. There's too much else to talk about. There's other things to talk about. You don't need that in your life. That was yesterday. Let's talk about tomorrow.
We've sort of spoken about the RSL, but are you a member of a Vietnam Veterans Association?
No. I'm in the TPI Association, but No, there was a lot of infighting with a particular group, and I found I was too ill to tolerate that type of thing, so I've never really followed it. I don't need it. I've got a life and a family, and I'm a bit of a mixture because I've got many years of police service as well, so I've got two skills I can play in. Divided between two loyalties. Two hats on the coffin when I go.
Can you remember when you were back in Australia watching the fall of Saigon?
Yes, it was quite dramatic actually. I actually went into what they call the People's Palace in Saigon when I went back, and went through and listened to their little one-sided rhetoric of their version of everything, and just stand there and smile and agree to it and look at it, and saw the tank that pushed down the gate. Saw the helipad, saw the jet that was the only jet that ever dropped a bomb, an airplane. They stole a plane and dropped a bomb on Saigon. That's in the monument there. Went to one of the war museums where they have all the weapons and so forth on display, tanks and all sorts of things. And we did the same thing up in Hanoi. Hanoi is a far bigger museum. It's quite a big museum. It was interesting to see the other side. It was interesting to see the other side. I was shocked at the My Lai episode. I've got no other word for it. I was shocked at that. I can understand how it happened and why it happened, but let history be the judge of that.
And from what I've read, the My Lai massacre is what a lot of the protesters picked up on, and Australian blokes were blamed for things that weren't perpetuated by Australians. How did that make you feel?
Oh, we had one little girl at, I can't remember, Quang Nai I think is called, the town we stopped in, which is just, My Lai is an area, it's like a suburb, and as soon as we said we were Australians, she into us. She was the only one who could speak English in this little hotel we stayed in, and she abused us, and because we never ever said that we were servicemen, but the kids are given a very twisted view of everything. The Japanese rewrote history, and the Vietnamese are doing exactly the same. There's a couple of things I'd like to put on record here. Two things that shocked me deeply in the trips back to Vietnam. There are no old people anymore. They're all gone. The reason was in 1973, when the North Vietnamese crossed over the DMZ and started to take South Vietnam, they committed atrocities by finding people who were in the military and saying to them, or people who hadn't been in the military, and saying to them, whose side are you on? Oh, of course we're on your side. Here's a gun, kill your parents to prove it. And there is a generation of people gone from South Vietnam, and it shocks. It's a sheer shock. I know this to be true because I've spoken with a number of people there, and I said, why is it that you survived? And they said, we didn't have any children. And they were able to escape the purge. That was purge number one. And in 1975 they committed ethnic cleansing, and they went right through Vietnam from top to bottom, and they deported anybody of cross origin. And I know this to be true because when I was in Vung Tau arranging the air tickets, I ran into a young girl of about 25 years of age, somewhere around that. She was a Negro Vietnamese, and she told me the story of how she was detained with her mother and deported because of they wanted to ethnic cleanse any cross-cultured persons from Vietnam. And she told me the story of how they were just bundled onto any plane that would take them, and they eventually arrived in New York because she was a negress. She's half negress, of course. And that's never ever been brought out anywhere that I can know of. This ethnic cleansing in this generation, this loss of this entire generation, it's two things that have been well and truly covered up. But if you travel long enough and speak with enough people, and you can get into the right areas to talk to people, you'll First of all, there are no old people. And everywhere was old people. There are none. And this girl telling me about the ethnic cleansing, it's two things that shocked me. But it's now history.
So how did it feel to be home watching the fall of Saigon on television?
It was something that was coming, and it was well publicised that it was coming, so it wasn't actually a shock at the time as if it was sort of something that suddenly happened. It was something that you could see was becoming inevitable because the Americans have pulled out, and there were signs throughout the television history of the Americans pulling out, and you knew what was going to happen. So it wasn't a dramatic shock. It was something that you really were prepared for.
Prior to being diagnosed with PTSD, obviously there were other blokes like yourself that were having little things like that happen.
Yeah.
Did you find that the Army was very supportive of you with those sort of things?
You're joking. The who? No, unfortunately, nobody wanted to accept this insidious disease. Nobody wanted to be accepting of it because they could be then responsible. If you're responsible, it might cost them $1. I'm not blaming the Army for this, I'm blaming the government. And of course not, nobody wanted to know. No way in the world. It took until a multitude of people came up and the doctors diagnosed the same thing. It wasn't accepted, and today it's probably even, there are doctors who don't accept it today. That's their bad luck, it's a reality.
Do you think there was an unspoken knowledge at the time that there were blokes like yourself that had come back that were having problems?
They must know, because my father-in-law is an example. How many men that came out of the Second World War suffered from PTSD, but they came home victors, we came home villains. They came home to a society that wanted us, we came home to a society that rejected us. They were told to get on with their life, and they did, and there was no such thing as doctors in those days, and there certainly wasn't psychiatrists. I mean, they say, boy, they're the wacky little bunch that sit down there and play with dolls. And it's only the fact that the world has turned and technology and medicine has turned so much that they can today diagnose things like this. They can diagnose cancers and differentiate between them. The world is more accepting of these types of things because we know that there are things there, but we can't necessarily clinically put a name to them or put a cure to them. But the whole rejection of it was, we don't want to be held accountable, we don't want to be held responsible. That's the rejection of it.
Have you found yourself in the years since that you've almost had a thirst for information about Australia's involvement in Vietnam?
Yes, I have read a lot more than I would normally. I never had anything to do with Vietnam after I left it, other than to be confronted by it, by the news or whatever. But I have done a lot of study now, and I've looked at how the war started and what progressed and the reasons behind it. I actually, when I travelled back through Vietnam in 1999, I saw the Morris Major that the Buddhist monk was driven to the centre of Saigon in, who incinerated himself. I actually visited that temple and spoke with the men, the holy men there, and although they're all young men now, and they were quite surprised that I could remember that event, but I remember that event very clearly, and so I've travelled extensively and read extensively on the Vietnam issue, and I feel I can discuss the matter quite freely with anyone, and knowledgeably too.
What makes you proudest of your service?
The fact that I did it. The fact that I did it. I'm proud that I did it. I'm proud of the other fellows that did it too. I have no problems with it at all. And now that the public, and particularly younger generations, are coming to accept and realise what we did and what we suffered and how we've suffered since we've returned, they're becoming far more tolerant than the older generation, and it's a good thing to see the younger generation are now asking questions, asking why, and not criticising, not holding judgment of what we did, because they're realising that we were given a job to do, whether it was a good job, bad job, whether you agree with it or not. They're coming more now to terms with the fact that we are part of Australia's history, and we have a right to be treated equally as anybody else does.
A couple of blokes think that it's unfortunate that the Battle of Long Tan sort of gets most of the limelight of Australia's involvement in Vietnam.
The Battle of Long Tan was one of the most horrendous battles the Australians ever fought. The men that fought it, D Company 6 RAR, suffered extensively. The phenomenal odds that were against them, and there was a battalion against a company. You're talking 200 men against 1,000 in round figures. The artillery played a big part in it. I think there's got to be a pinnacle of that. I think you shouldn't criticise that people recognise Vietnam for that one battle. It is unfortunate because there were many big battles. Our battalion fought in Coral, which was a tremendous battle. Other battalions have suffered equally. But history has a funny way of picking on things, and they've chosen Long Tan to be the focal point, and so be it. I have no problem with that. I certainly understand that if Long Tan had gone the other way, we as an Australian base would have been wiped out, because the battalions weren't available at the time that battalion formed to attack. And if they knew what was inside, they would have gone straight through that base, and there would have been an upheaval that you would never have heard the bottom of, because a lot of Australians would have died, because there were people in there that could really not defend themselves, engineers and all allied services that support the infantry battalions. It was, I think it's a moment that should be seen, and can be seen as part of Vietnam. Not necessarily the focal point, but it's been chosen that way for history's sake.
There's often also a lot of discussion about the relationship the Royal Australian Air Force and the Army had in Vietnam as far as 9 Squadron and that were concerned. You were in a unique position where you were obviously working a lot with them.
Interacted with 9 quite a lot, yeah.
What's your impression of that?
Bloody great guys. They were better than the cowboy Americans. The Australian fellas would go in areas where the Americans wouldn't. There are only a few of us, or a few of them, but they did a marvellous role, and I don't think they get enough recognition.
And what do you say to other people that do criticise that relationship?
I've never heard anyone actually criticise it. You've obviously spoken with a lot more people, and as you said, there's two sides. You're either pro or negative. And, I can't see any point in dwelling on the negatives. It's everybody makes mistakes. The last fella that didn't make a mistake got nailed on a cross at Easter, so who are we? We're mere mortals.
And how do you feel towards Long Tan Day, which is now Vietnam Veterans Day?
Well, Long Tan Day and Vietnam Veterans Day are the same day, so why not? As far as I'm concerned, why not? It's now history. It's recognised as history. We recognise Gallipoli for the First World War, and I don't think there's really that too much of a focal point other than New Guinea on the Second World War. So each war has something to define its events, so why not Long Tan? A lot of never have so few given so much. I can't remember how Sir Winston Churchill has said it, but Sir Winston Churchill's statement about how so many owe so much to so few, I think are the words he used. Well, I reverse that and say how so many owe so much to so few relates to Long Tan Day. Because there was just a company against a battalion. That's the odds were incredible. How anyone survived was just incredible, and that was just a short few months before I went to Vietnam. So I was well aware of where it happened and that type of thing.
So if you imagine this as a time capsule on your grandkids that mightn't even exist yet.
Hi kids.
Get to read this in years to come. What is the one thing you'd like to tell them?
Be proud to be Australian. Don't shirk your responsibilities. Everybody should be responsible for being an Australian citizen and being proud of it. And that's the message I'd give my grandchildren.
Are there any other last little things you'd like to say to the archive?
No, I'd like to thank you too for your tolerance of me, putting up with me today. And I'm very pleased to the archives to be doing this. I think it's very important. It's long overdue, but they're certainly making amends for their inactivity. It's not their fault because the culture was that way, but the culture has turned, and it's great to see it being done, and I hope they get everyone that ever visited Vietnam as a serviceman. I know it's impossible, but it's a wish. Thank you.